Cold front. Actually, we've got a change in the weather on the way. Colder north to northwesterly winds, bringing frequent showers to northern and western Scotland. At lower levels, rain, hail, perhaps some sleet. Over the hills, those showers will be falling as snow, above 200 or 300 metres. Further south, though, we're seeing that cloud and outbreaks of rain sink its way southwards, and as a result, increasingly cloudy for much of England and Wales, with outbreaks of rain into North Wales, parts of the Midlands by the afternoon.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win Christmas on Us this year. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. We'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
A very, very good afternoon to you and a happy Friday. It's 3 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show here on GB News. Of course, we're broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK. On today's show, in Brussels, as we speak, faceless EU bureaucrats are planning a bombshell demand for youth mobility as a red line in any deal between the UK and the European Union. Now, that could open Britain to millions of under-30s from the continent. And today, for the first time, I reveal the shocking numbers of young Europeans who could soon be pouring into Keir Starmer's Britain. And there are only 5 days to go until thousands of angry farmers descend on Westminster to protest about Labour's disastrous budget. But on today's show, I'll be joined by a turkey farmer who's spitting feathers because he feels he's been stuffed by Rachel Reeves. And children as young as 9 are among thousands of Brits who've been reported to the coppers for non-crime hate incidents. In one case, 2 schoolgirls were grilled by cops after saying another pupil smelled of fish. Have we completely lost the plot when it comes to free speech? And Ed Miliband has said that he'll ban all new future coal mines in Britain, sounding the final death knell for a proposed pit in Whitehaven that was set to create hundreds of well-paid jobs. As China builds one new coal-fired power station every week, I'll speak to a former Whitehaven coal miner who thinks that we need coal, not dole, here in Britain. And now it might sound barking mad, but is your dog racist? Well, PC pooch owners are increasingly seeking professional help over anxiety if their dog barks at people of colour. This is a true story, and I'll be joined by a dog trainer for tips on how to make your dog do the right and not the far right thing. That's all coming on this. What a show. Always a pleasure to have your company. So as we speak in Brussels, they are plotting a freedom of movement deal exactly the same as we had before Brexit. And they are saying it's a red line. Today I'm going to reveal the true, startling, the jaw-dropping numbers of people that would entail turning up on our shore. I thought we voted to take back control of our borders. I thought 17.4 million Brexiteers cried enough to open borders with Brussels. It seems that the bureaucrats over in Brussels have other ideas. That's all coming on the show, but first, get in touch the usual ways, gbnews.com/your say. But now here's your news headlines, and it's Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just gone 3 o'clock. These are your headlines from the GB Newsroom. 4 teenagers and a 45-year-old man have been convicted at Bristol Crown Court of murdering 15-year-old Mason Rist and 16-year-old Max Dixon, who were attacked with machetes in a case of mistaken identity. 18-year-old Riley Tolliver and a 16-year-old boy and a 17-year-old boy and a getaway driver, 45-year-old Anthony Snook, were found guilty of the murders of Mason and Max by a jury of 9 men and 3 women at Bristol Crown Court after a 6-week trial. A 15-year-old boy was also found guilty of the murder of Max after previously pleading guilty to the murder of Mason. More on this breaking news story as we get it. The UK's economy barely grew between July and September, with uncertainty about the budget being blamed for the weak growth. It was expected to meet the same 0.2% growth figures reported in Germany and Japan, but instead the economy grew by 0.1%. The GDP figures have pushed the UK towards the bottom of the G7 growth table for the 3rd quarter over the year. Chancellor Rachel Reeves said she's not satisfied with the figures.
Of course, I'm not content with the GDP numbers that we've seen today. If everything was fine, we wouldn't be taking the measures that we are to try and unlock the growth that I know exists in the economy but hasn't really been felt, either in living standards or in the competitiveness of our economy these last few years. That's why in my Mansion House speech last night, I set out a number of measures to unlock long-term patient capital from our pension funds to get better returns to savers, but crucially to free up investment, to invest in start-up and scale-up businesses and in the opportunities for infrastructure investments in Britain.
Now, Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride says they're extremely disappointing.
Further evidence that I'm afraid this government has no plan for growth. I mean, in fact, in the budget, as we know, national insurance on employers rocketing up, which is going to be inflationary, depress wages and lead to higher unemployment. So I'm afraid, you know, even if you look at the forecasts that the OBR produced at the time of the budget, that shows lower growth across the forecast than they were forecasting when we were in office back in the spring. So great to talk about growth, but there's a difference between talking about it and actually delivering it.
Meanwhile, Rachel Reeves told City chiefs she plans to create pension megafunds that will power growth in the economy and reward British savers. In her first Mansion House speech as Chancellor, Ms Reeves announced plans for the megafunds, which she said could bring in £80 billion to invest in businesses and infrastructure. She addressed issues of financial instability and promised to make economic growth Labour's, quote, central mission in the coming years. The megafunds will mirror schemes in Australia and Canada, where pension funds take advantage of size to invest in assets that have higher growth potential. In other news, Sir Ed Davey has visited high street businesses calling for a government U-turn on the rise of bus fare caps. The party leader had been due to take a lesson at a depot in Oxfordshire today and hear concerns from bus company representatives about the £1 hike in the threshold. But instead, he met people at shops in Wantage as the party highlights research suggesting some may avoid travelling to their local high street due to expected fare rises. The £2 cap on single fares that applies on most routes outside London will be replaced by a new £3 cap until the end of 2025. That was announced by Chancellor Rachel Reeves in the budget. The Lib Dems have called on the government to reverse the move.
They've increased the cap on bus fares from £2 to £3 during a cost of living crisis. People who are really struggling, who depend on the bus to go to work, to go to towns like Wantage, young people to go to their college, they're going to have to pay this extra money and it's going to hit them hard. And when we're trying to get people into public transport, into buses, it's the wrong decision.
Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Martin.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Now, some breaking news to bring you now. GB News can now confirm that 33,000 small boat migrants have crossed the Channel this year alone. And joining us now is our Homeland Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, welcome to the show. It never rains, but it pours for Sir Keir Starmer yesterday. A brief moment of celebration with the arrest of that Turkish man, a Mr. Big. And now back to business as normal. The boats keep pouring in. Tell us more.
And didn't we always know that this was going to be the pattern for what we would see in the weeks and months ahead? That grim milestone of 33,000 small boat migrants so far this year was reached just a short time ago, as our Kent producer confirmed to us that a second small boat crossed the English Channel into English waters today, carrying more than 100 people between those two boats, and that takes us now over 33,000 for the year. That is 3,500 more than the numbers who crossed in the whole of last year. And we still got, what is it, about a month and a half before the end of the year. OK, the weather conditions are likely to be a bit more poor in the Channel on more days than not in the coming weeks, but there will still be enough days for that number to tick up by a few thousand more, I have no doubt, before the end of the year. And as you pointed out in your introduction there, Martin, just this time yesterday, we were reporting on the fact that the Prime Minister was hailing the arrest of a small boat supplier, a significant figure, according to Sir Keir Starmer. But what this goes to show you today is that one supplier is only one part of this huge illegal endeavour. There are many suppliers out there that these organised criminal people smugglers can go to for their small boats, engines and other equipment.
And Mark White, as you've been saying for months, if not years, you get rid of one drug dealer, they're replaced by another drug dealer. It's exactly the same in this evil trade. And another piece of bad news yesterday, hot on the heels of Sir Keir Starmer's good news, an astonishing sight, Mark, of 98 illegal immigrants aboard one craft, which I believe is a grim new record.
Yeah, it's a record in terms of boats that have made it to UK waters carrying that many people on a single vessel. It's not uncommon, sadly, for boats to be launched from the beaches of northern France carrying more than 100 migrants. But what often happens is they are so vastly overloaded and weighed down, they can't make any headway. They get into serious difficulties. The French, who are escorting these vessels, move in. They take a few dozen people, usually from the boat, and then the remainder on the boat, 50 or so, decide that they're going to stay and continue on their journey to the UK. It happens day in, day out. This was one where the French, if they did intervene, no one was taken off, and all 98 of these migrants made it to UK waters.
Well, once again, Mark White, we saw they were escorted into British waters by a French craft, and then they were picked up by the RNLI and taxied ashore. And Mark White, people are really, really pulling their hair out about this now. Smash the gangs, a big arrest, a ticker-take moment. Here we go. We're having a breakthrough. We've turned a corner. Mark, nothing is changing, is it? In fact, as you just pointed out, things seem to be getting worse.
Yeah, there's been no slowdown whatsoever in the numbers crossing the English Channel since Labour came to power, vowing to smash the gangs. In fact, as we just pointed out before, we are ahead by 3,500 on where we were for the whole of last year, and we'll be significantly up on that by the end of the year. Any endeavour to try to dismantle the criminal gangs is for the longer term. It's going to take a very long time indeed to be able to make any inroad. And even then, whether they actually dismantle all of the gangs is a moot point at the moment. We just don't know how this law enforcement effort will go. And all the while, they keep coming across, and the numbers have to be accommodated somewhere. And we're hearing more and more stories coming through of these hotels that the Labour government told us they were going to end the use of, being requisitioned again by this government to put in migrants and deny the facility of that hotel to a local community.
And Mark White, if I may ask you on an affiliated topic, if I can, while we're waiting for our next guest. I'm about to report on the fact there is a secret meeting today in Brussels about, once again, putting freedom of movement for the under-30s back on the table. We hear this is now being treated as a red line by Brussels, something they're going to be adamant upon if there is to be any form of new trade or arrangement deal. And they're ramping up the fear off the back of Donald Trump and the imposition possibly of tariffs. Time and time again, Mark White's Keir Starmer said, no, we won't do that. But it seems to continually keep coming up. Mark White, do you think this is something that could potentially come back to haunt us here in Britain?
Well, we may be arguing over the final points like we were very much with some of the tax rises we saw in the last budget there, with the government saying that, no, there is no freedom of movement, but yes, there is freedom of movement for the young. And the problem is, and the concern would be, that even a freedom of movement arrangement for the young under 30s, and that's not that young, it's a very significant potential number of people that it could then start moving back to the UK, because you'll remember, of course, before Brexit, there were many people in that age group who were coming to the UK to work in the likes of the hospitality industry. So we could see a similar flow of migrants under 30 coming again if Sir Keir Starmer decides that he will agree with the European Union's red line on negotiations here and agree to that freedom of movement for those under the age of 30.
Mark White, I think you're exactly right. In fact, I've been through the numbers, I've crunched the numbers. I'm going to review those on the show in a short while. That red line really should set a red alarm bell ringing for Brits. Thank you, Mark White, for joining us on the show. Always an absolute pleasure. And as I've just been saying in Brussels today, EU bureaucrats are planning a bombshell demand for youth mobility as a red line in any deal between the UK and the European Union, and that could open Britain to millions of under-30s. Are we back once again on the road to rejoining the European Union? Well, GB News political correspondent Catherine Forster spoke to Rachel Reeves about this very topic earlier on today.
And wanting a closer relationship with the European Union in that speech, something that the Governor of the Bank of England talked about as well, in that it had hampered growth, Brexit had hampered growth. How's that going to work? And can you reassure GB News viewers, many of whom voted for Brexit, that Brexit is safe with this government?
However you voted in the referendum, it's undeniable that it is harder for businesses today to trade with our nearest neighbours and trading partners in the European Union. Doesn't mean that we should go back into the EU or the single market or customs union, but we do need a reset of that relationship, because it's in our British national interest to improve trade flows and make it easier for great British businesses to sell into European markets. And that's why next month I'll be attending the Eurogroup finance ministers meeting to make that case in Brussels for free and open trade.
So, youth mobility scheme, is it freedom of movement dressed up in a different name? Well, joining me now in the studio, I'm delighted to say, is the Chief Executive Officer from European Movements UK, Sir Nick Harvey. Sir Nick, welcome to the studio. Pleasure to have your company. So, here we are again. No freedom of movement will return after Brexit, we've been told endlessly. A meeting is happening in Brussels today, and the European Commission, they're saying they're adamant. Youth mobility schemes for under-30s in EU is what they say, quotes, a red line and a key demand in any discussion with Britain with increased integration. And Keir Starmer certainly does want increased integration. Is a youth mobility scheme a price worth paying?
Well, a youth mobility scheme would be hugely in our interests. It would certainly be in the interests of young British people who would start being able to go for a limited period of time and work and study and travel in European countries again. It would be a huge advantage to the British economy to allow this again, because we have chronic shortages of labour in certain key sectors, particularly hospitality, which young Europeans would readily come in and do for a while before they went back home to resume their lives elsewhere. So I hope very much that it's something that will happen. I think, in fairness, the Europeans have been signalling for months and months and months that this is something they want to talk about. They've yet to make a proposal, so I'm glad to hear they're having a meeting today to try and define a little more precisely what they want to propose. The government hasn't looked very interested in discussing it so far, but they can't really judge that until there's a proposal on the table for them to have a look at.
OK, it's got a couple of graphics I want to pop up on the screen now. Let's get the first one up for us to have a look at, if we can. So this is the Erasmus scheme, as it used to be called. This is the student exchange scheme. You can see there that 99.6% of UK students never used Erasmus. It was a tiny percentile of British students used it. In fact, at its peak, it was only around about 9,900 British students went to the European Union. Look at our next graphic. This is just Erasmus alone. This is a tiny percentile of all under 30s. As you can see, that's pretty much one-way traffic. That's in 1 year. Over 3 times the amount of European Union students came here to the UK, and that's just students. When you look at the numbers of under 30s that came to the UK between 2016 and 2019, it was getting on for 900,000 under 30s came to Britain. Every single year, it was over 200,000. In some, it was 250,000. And there's every reason to believe that if a new scheme came in, it would be bigger than that, because it'd be boom time. There'd be a rush to get into the UK. That would suppress wages for the working classes. It would cut down on jobs in hospitality. It would cut down on jobs on building sites. It would certainly up the cost of university for the white working classes in Britain, who are the least likely to attend university, because they'd be priced out of the market by all of these foreign students. Great if you're a big business owner and you want cheap labour. Great if you're a university owner. But if you're a Brit, you're going to get stuffed by such a deal.
Well, you're certainly not. I think we need to take some of those things one at a time. I mean, between 2016 and 2019, we had complete freedom of movement. Anybody who wanted to could come here and work, and anyone who wanted to go to Europe could go there and work or study or
But it was
live.
it was one-way traffic on the whole. Far more people came here
the
than
population
went to
of Europe is bigger than the population of the UK.
Precisely.
So obviously that's going to be the number flow. I'm saying to you, we want these people to come here. Our economy desperately needs them. We're desperate to try and get overseas students into our universities.
But the electorate don't agree with you on that.
Well, I'm not so sure you're right about that. During the course of the election, we commissioned questions to go on to polls, and we asked the public, would you favour a reciprocal right of this sort? And we found that it was supported not only by the population as a whole, it was supported by people who had voted Leave, it was supported by people who were voting for reform, it was supported by people voting Conservative, it was supported in the Red Wall. British youngsters have had rights that were theirs taken away from them, and this is the way to get them back. And this is not freedom of movement. Well, freedom of movement is complete freedom to come and go as you please. This is something that is time limited. It has a visa. It has conditions. It's not freedom of movement. I wish it were, because that would be a thoroughly good thing. But this is a pay limitation.
You speak in semantics. You speak in semantics.
I'm not. It's fundamentally different.
Freedom of youth mobility is freedom of movement for the 18 to 30s. It's freedom of movement for a smaller percentile. Except here's the rub. If you look at the numbers, the 18 to 30s make up around about 45 to 50% of anybody who came into the European Union before Brexit. Because guess what? Young people are more mobile, more ambitious, and want to go away. And so what I'm saying is it would be 50% of where we were before, and probably more, because it'd be seen as, wow, the gates are open, let's get in sharpish. It would be a disaster for population control in this country. It would be a disaster for the working classes, and it would price the working classes out of British universities. Facts.
No, the British universities are on their knees because they haven't had enough applications this year from British students. They're desperate for overseas students to fill some of that gap.
They pay 50% more than Brits. Of course they're desperate to get foreign students in. They're treating foreign students like cash cows, but they're taking places that Brits can't afford to compete with. The richest Europeans come and price the Brits out.
But there aren't enough British people applying to go. This is the problem. We have sectors in this country, particularly hospitality, but there are care, there is transport, logistics, there are hospitals, desperate for labour. Why? Because, like the whole of the rest of the developed world,
for cheap labour.
No,
they want cheap labour. How about paying a decent wage to a Brit, so we don't rely on immigration?
Where are all these Brits? We've got
on benefits.
No, they're not.
Let's get them off benefits and get them working for Britain.
We've got the lowest unemployment we've ever had. We have
Millions
got a
are out of work.
desperate labour shortage, the same as the whole of the developed world, because we have got too small a population of working age relative to the population as a whole. The whole of the world is competing for labour, and as you rightly say, these youngsters
addicted to cheap labour. That's been the problem for years. Cheap minimum wage labour, in fact, often below minimum wage for a while. It was 20 percentile points below minimum wage in care homes. It was legalised slave labour. It was a disgrace.
I agree with that, but the issue of where the labour comes from is not the issue there. The issue is the immorality of rogue employers. And I'm saying to you, young, fit, healthy Europeans who come and go are an absolutely ideal labour source, which if we'd got the slightest wit about us, we would be competing vigorously to get our hands on. And this is a thoroughly good and positive development. And in return, young Brits can go and work and study in Europe, which is a right they have had taken away from them.
By the electorate, democratically, and that's the issue.
They didn't get a vote themselves. Older people decided that they wanted to stop this, and this is something which, I'm telling you again, our opinion polling shows the public as a whole, including those hard-to-please groups that I mentioned, all approve of if it is on a reciprocal basis. We need this, and if we're going to repair the relationship with Europe, which, let's face it, is in a mess. It's an economic mess.
Exports have increased since Brexit. You know, our economy is
costing us £115 billion a year, not to be in the single market. If we can repair some of that relationship, then we haven't saved anything.
Look, we ran out of time being told we've got to move on. I could talk about Brexit all day.
An arm and a leg.
In fact, I absolutely miss it. Thank you very much, Sir Nick Harvey, Chief Executive Officer from European Movement UK. Thank you very much. Now, still to come, it's Farmageddon. I'll be crossing live to Lancashire, where I'll be joined by furious farmers. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Following the summer riots and the resurgence of far-right ideologies, the former Education Secretary told peers that reinforcing shared values is now more crucial than ever.
So we're asking this morning, should we teach British values or would it be a step backward?
Or how do you even start? To debate this now, we're joined by the Campaign for Real Education chairman, Chris McGovern, and political commentator Matthew Stadlen.
Well, I think these days, particularly in schools, it's quite fashionable to look at the negative sides of Britain's identity, particularly British history. Personally, I think I'm very proud of being British, and I think we need to be proud of our country like most other countries around the world are.
As Chris says, Matthew, lots of other countries do it. Heck, you only have to look at the United States, don't you, to see how sort of patriotic they are. Is there anything wrong in trying to instil a bit of that amongst our youth?
I'm just worried it sounds a little bit communist, Stephen, being told what it is to be British. I've got my own personal but very vague views of what British values might be: inclusivity, patience, being able to queue, decency, respect for democracy and the rule of law. But I mean, very many people will have different sets of values. Some people are racist. So are British values racist? You talked about the far right. I think we all know what the far right is. It's sort of violent, xenophobic racism. But if you have, say, I don't know, 3-4 million people in this country who might describe themselves as racist or far right, and they're British, or as British as you lot and as I am, does that mean those values get taught in schools? My worry is it's a little bit communist.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Your time's 3:28. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, farmers up and down the country are gearing up to protest against the government's inheritance tax raid on the agricultural sector on Tuesday next week. And joining me now to discuss this is GB News reporter Jack Carson, who is live from a farm in Lancashire. Jack, welcome to the show. Farmers have been coming on this show endlessly, telling us they're absolutely livid about what's happening. Tell us the mood on the ground there in Lincolnshire.
Well, here in Lancashire, Martin, it's exactly the same mood that you've been feeling from across the country with all the coverage we've been given, you know, since these inheritance tax changes announced in that budget. We're here in Lancashire today. This is a mixed livestock farm. You can see all the beautiful cows here. Some of them have been very friendly with us. Certainly not camera shy, as you can see, Martin. But, you know, Craig, the farmer, is out here at 6 o'clock this morning feeding these. He'd been up since 1 a.m. So there's a serious shift that is put in by by these farmers. But we've been speaking to all kinds of people today, showing actually how it's the chain down, whether it's a cattle auction, auctioneers who were at earlier, or whether it's also a machinery business that was already having concerns from farmers about whether they're going to make that investment. We're joined now by one of the sons and father of the farm here, John and Carl Kempson. I mean, John, just kind of tell me, you've been out on the farm all day working today. I mean, what are some of the pressures that you're facing right now?
It's long hours. We're up from 1 o'clock till it'll be 7, 8 o'clock when we get in tonight. Just long hours, putting the hard work in. The weather, it's unchanged, like damp, wetness here, all that. Like it's always changing for us in the farming sector. Like it's hard work, very hard work. Very. And as for her budget last week, I don't know where she's getting the figures from. How us little working family farms are going to cope with it. We're trying to pass it on from generation to my dad's pass it down to me and Craig. I have a little girl and boy that I'm hopeful they'll get on, but I can't just see where a future for them at the moment where she's changing things and that.
Yeah, so the Treasury figures say it's about 28% of farms. Again, the government's saying yesterday it's only about 500 farms are going to be affected. Yeah. You don't believe that's the case?
No. I've looked in the farming paper this morning. There weren't one farm under what money she's saying to go and try and invest in them new farms and trying to get ourselves bigger and better. And then just not there. What our figures are completely wrong.
Right, John, well, Carl, I mean, like you say, you were the first generation of farmer here. Are you seriously concerned that, after you're gone, you don't know whether this is going to be able to continue?
Yeah, I'm very concerned. These two lads has worked as what I have ever seen they could walk. They've done the sheep, they've done the cattle all the way through. They've built this business, built the portfolio as they have the minute in time. And if I don't do something about it before I die, they'll end up with nothing. So what is the point of 40 years, 50 years work if we don't do something about it now?
I mean, what kind of impact do you think this might have on food security? Because the government is saying the reason they've done this is because they want, a fair and balanced system. They want to try and have, relief which is fiscally responsible. But what do you think this could do, for the future, for the things like food security, which, the National Farmers Union have said is so important?
The food security of this country is mainly important for everything you do, whether it's from a pint of milk, a carrot, a piece of steak, everything, it counts on the farmer. And it's like I said earlier on, when you sit down tonight, you general public out there, sit down tonight and you pick your glass of wine up, it's all been grown by a farmer. Pick a pint up, them hops has always been grown by a farmer. If you have steak and chips, all been grown by a farmer. Everything we do, whether it's a vegetarian meal or everything you do, is this base all the way around us. And they've got to look at it. We're not asking for an out. We just want a security for the future to feed these people of this country.
Carl, John, thank you so much for joining us all day here. We've been here at this farm, as I mentioned, we were here at 6 o'clock this morning. There is a real reality of concern here on the ground in Lancashire and across the country because, of course, those farmers taking to London next week, Martin, on that protest.
Fantastic reporting. No farmers, no food. The very best of British there to the boys down on farm in Lancashire. Thank you very much, Jack Carson. Now, earlier on, we put these concerns to the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, and here's what she told GB News.
If you're a couple who own a farm, including a home on the farm, you can pass on £3 million tax-free to the next generation. And beyond that £3 million, you are taxed at half of the rate that everybody else is taxed for inheritance tax, at 20% compared to 40%. And where there is an inheritance tax bill, you can pay that over 10 years interest-free in a way that no one else paying inheritance tax can. So I think this is a fair deal for farmers, whilst also ensuring that we bring in the money to get our public finances back on a firm footing.
Well, there's loads more still to come between now and 4 o'clock. But first, here's your latest news headlines, and it's Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. It's 3:33. These are your headlines from the GB newsroom. 4 teenagers and a 45-year-old man have been convicted at Bristol Crown Court of murdering 15-year-old Mason Wrist and 16-year-old Max Dixon, who were attacked with machetes in a case of mistaken identity. 18-year-old Riley Tolliver, a 16-year-old boy, a 17-year-old boy and a getaway driver, 45-year-old Anthony Snook, were found guilty of the murders of Mason and Max by a jury of 9 men and 3 women at Bristol Crown Court after a 6-week trial. A 15-year-old boy was also found guilty of the murder of Max after previously pleading guilty to the murder of Mason. GB News can now confirm that 33,000 small boat migrants have crossed the Channel this year. More than 100 others crossed in 2 small boats today. It comes just a day after the Prime Minister announced the significant arrest of a suspected migrant boat supplier. Now, the UK's economy barely grew between July and September, with uncertainty about the budget being blamed for the weak growth. It was expected to meet the same 0.2% growth figures reported in Germany and Japan, but instead the economy grew by 0.1%. The GDP figures have pushed the UK towards the bottom of the G7 growth table for the 3rd quarter of the year. Chancellor Rachel Reeves said she's not satisfied with the figures.
Of course, I'm not content with the GDP numbers that we've seen today. If everything was fine, we wouldn't be taking the measures that we are to try and unlock the growth that I know exists in the economy but hasn't really been felt, either in living standards or in the competitiveness of our economy these last few years. That's why in my Mansion House speech last night, I set out a number of measures to unlock long-term patient capital from our pension funds to get better returns to savers, but crucially to free up investment to invest in start-up and scale-up businesses and in the opportunities for infrastructure investments in Britain.
Meanwhile, Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride says they're extremely disappointing.
Further evidence that I'm afraid this government has no plan for growth. I mean, in fact, in the budget, as we know, national insurance on employers rocketing up, which is going to be inflationary, depress wages and lead to higher unemployment. So I'm afraid, even if you look at the forecasts that the OBR produced at the time of the budget, that shows lower growth across the forecast than they were forecasting when we were in office back in the spring. So great to talk about growth, but there's a difference between talking about it and actually delivering it.
Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. A fine day for many of us out there. A lot of cloud in the sky, but some sunshine in the south as well as across parts of the northeast. But it's going to turn increasingly wet and windy in the far north and northwest for the rest of the day as a cold front sinks south. That's going to introduce a substantial change in the weather during the next few days across the whole of the UK. However, Friday ends with those clear spells in the south, good conditions for viewing the supermoon. And then, under those clear skies, temperatures fall away. A few pockets of frost and fog in the south by dawn. Meanwhile, the cold front sinks south to end up across northern England, where we've got the cloud staying at 7 to 11 Celsius. But a wet start to the day for parts of Cumbria into Yorkshire as that cold front sinks south. And for Northern Ireland and Scotland, behind that cold front, actually we've got a change in the weather on the way. Colder north to northwesterly winds, bringing frequent showers to northern and western Scotland. At lower levels, rain, hail, perhaps some sleet. Over the hills, those showers will be falling in snow, above 200 or 300 metres. Further south, though, we're seeing that cloud and outbreaks of rain sink its way southwards, and as a result increasingly cloudy for much of England and Wales, with outbreaks of rain into North Wales, parts of the Midlands by the afternoon. Some spots of rain to the south of that as the cloud thickens, but nothing substantial. To the north, meanwhile, we've got that change that's already arrived. It's going to feel much colder in the wind, and it will be windy throughout Friday night. Gales for the far north of Scotland. That wind only slowly easing during Saturday. But it's also going to increasingly bring some wintry weather. Initially, snow building up over the tops of the mountains in Scotland, but by Sunday night, that snow will be settling to lower levels. And on Monday, outbreaks of rain for many parts of the country, but the risk of significant hill snow in the north.
The latest GB News travel. Good afternoon. Hello, I'm Jules Buckley. The A167 in County Durham's currently closed between the Cock of the North roundabout in Langley Moor and Sunderland Bridge, and slow going. There's a collision there. There's one as well affecting traffic on the westbound M62. Very slow going Ingley Top to Rishworth Moor, junction 24 to 22. A lane closure there in place. Now the Loughborough Road, the A60 in Nottingham, is currently shut between the A52, Nottingham Knight Island and Ruddington, closed and queuing at the scene there of a collision. Ilford Lane, the A123 in London's blocked by Bedford Road, slow going there whilst the building fire is being attended to. And delays in Devon, eastbound A30 blocked from the Honiton turning in a Pottery through towards Yarkham. An overturned car there means delays on the approach. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Welcome back. Your time is 3:39. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, Ed Miliband has said that he will ban all new coal mines in Britain, sounding the final death knell for a proposed pit in Whitehaven that was set to create hundreds of well-paid local jobs. Now, this move would mean that the UK will become one of the first countries in the entire world to ban new coal mines. And joining me now to discuss this is the former coal miner David Craddock. David, welcome to the show. Pleasure to have your company. How does it make you feel when you remember the industry of your youth, the industry that gave so much prosperity to your community, my dad's community? My dad was down the pit 47 years. Communities were well off. Everybody had full work. Everybody was happy. People took care of their houses. Times were prosperous. There's my dad. He was down Cockgrave 47 years. And now that's all been signed away, looking like forever, by Ed Miliband this week. David Craddock, how does it make you feel?
It makes me feel sad, Martin, but I don't believe it's forever. I'll make a prediction live on TV that even if this lot don't like coal, there isn't the technology to replace it at the moment, and they will come back for this coal. That's a prediction from me.
Well, you made that prediction twice now, and we'll make a note of it, David. Now, the fact of the matter is the coal in this pit in Whitehaven is very good quality coal. The technology to get it out is far more advanced than back in your day, back in my dad's day. The dust can be minimised, the noise can be minimised, the environmental impact can be minimised. And, of course, it means we don't have to import stuff from all the way around the world. And, David, there is still one coal mine every day opened in China. Do you think that to meet these global targets, which, by the way, the world's biggest polluters aren't even caring about, Britain is just signing its own death warrant?
The industry in other parts of the world is realistic. They know what technology can do. They've seen the limitations of wind and hydropower, you know, and they've realised that coal is the only way at the moment to make large amounts of steel for the wind turbines that they're putting out, which are getting increasingly taller and use more steel. There isn't any other way. Electric arc and stuff like that is coming on, and if it gets better, then fair enough. But at the moment, you can't produce steel in quantity other than using blast furnaces.
And you're absolutely right, because that level of strength, that engineering steel, it requires coking coal. It requires a far higher temperature than, for example, we'll be seeing at Port Talbot. Now, they won't be coking there. They'll be, as you say, using the electric arc furnace. A lot of people don't understand the difference in the strength of that steel. And, of course, that means, once again, David, we rely on importing steel from places like China, where they use coal to make the steel anyway. So I'm just trying to get to the heart of the matter. It just feels, do you think it feels just so short-sighted to do this?
It's a policy put forward by the Billionaire Boys Club in Davos, and Ed Miliband seems to be an aficionado of theirs, and he's following their policies. It's the only place in the world with virtue signalling that we don't want to use coal or fossil fuels. And yet everyone else in the world is realistic, in India, in China, even in Australia and the USA. they're using more and more coal all the time. And we're just falling behind. It appears that we'll use anybody's coal. If you mine it anywhere else, we'll have it. And we'll have as much as you can send us with all the pollution that puts into the seas and whatever. But we don't want to do it. We don't want to be seen to be doing it.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, because, of course, the Labour Party is saying this sends a clear signal. They have strict climate targets and they stand by them. They say that everybody wants cleaner air, everybody wants things to be better for everybody. We can all agree on that. But, David, can I also just ask you the key point about what's the local job market like? I mean, as I said at the start, there was full employment when the pits were open around Nottinghamshire. Everybody had a job, everybody ate well, everybody lived well. People took care of their houses, they took care of their communities, there was hope and there was prosperity. What's it like now around Whitehaven?
Well, you've heard of the term two-tier Kia. Well, we've had that term round here for ages. It's two-tier West Cumbria, really. We've got the people who work at the large nuclear establishment who make very good wages and are prosperous and can afford new houses. And then you've got other people who work for service industries and these so-called green jobs. By the way, we haven't seen one of them yet. We were promised thousands of green jobs. We haven't got any, but any jobs that we get seem to be a minimum wage. So we've a two-tier economy in West Cumbria.
OK, well, let's hope and let's see if your prediction comes true there. David Craddock, you said on this show now twice that you believe that the coal pits will reopen at some point, but under this government, it looks like that's not going to happen. In fact, they're amending the Coal Industry Act of 1994 to perhaps write this off forever. But for meanwhile, thanks for joining us, former coal miner. The best of British to you, David Craddock. Thanks for joining me here on GB News. Now, Michael Shanks, the Energy Minister, said the decision will help the UK to transition to a more clean, secure energy system, and by consigning coal power to the past, we can pave the way for a clean, secure energy system that will protect bill payers and create a new generation of skilled workers. That's the government statement. Now, coming up, children as young as 9 years old are among the people being probed by police over non-crime hate incidents. One over saying a pupil smelled of fish. Has the world gone utterly stark, raving bonkers? That's next. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Tell us about this film, because it's obviously come from your own experiences.
We wanted to create something for the entertainment industry that wasn't just another kind of dull documentary. I mean, some of them are brilliant, they're very informative, but you kind of leave a bit bewildered and a little bit kind of flat. So we thought, I've got a passion for writing and you've obviously got an unbounded knowledge on the subject. Why don't we create a film with a kind of satirical look on eating disorders?
So this came it's been made 20 years after your own...
It is 20 years.
20 years,
practically to the day.
So Samantha, you suffered with OCD and an eating disorder as well?
Yes.
And that's when your mum became a counsellor, is that right?
A little bit later on, I think we spent a bit of time in the system and I realised that it wasn't working for us. So I took it on myself to learn as much as I could about the subject.
I call it a tragedy, probably the wrong word, but
suffering. No, it is a tragedy because mental ill health and eating disorders destroy the lives of not only the sufferers but their families as well.
But you've turned that into something so positive and so
it's amazing, really, that 20 years ago our story was just beginning, and 20 years on, what we've done. But I have to say that very little has changed in the system.
I've heard that.
And I think that's what we're passionate about.
Yeah, so...
That was why we wanted to... I mean, I work with families every day and I see the destruction that eating disorders and other mental illnesses not just bring to the sufferer, but the whole family.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really passions me, because obviously 20 years ago we were there. And I just feel that so much more needs to be done. And I think with eating disorders, there is still a lot of misunderstanding around the subject.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here We do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's almost 10 to 4. I'm Martin Daubney here on GB News. Now, children as young as 9 years old are among the people now being probed by police over insults in the school playground and posts online. Is this a complete and utter waste of police time? Well, earlier, GB News' political correspondent Catherine Forster put that precise question to the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves.
To ensure that there are 13,000 neighbourhood police officers and community support officers in our local areas, ensuring that our town centres and our high streets are safe and that people feel that they can go out in the evenings and feel safe in their local communities. That's the priority for police in Britain, and that's the priority of this Labour government.
So you don't think they should be investigating 9-year-olds' comments?
I don't think that that is the best use of police time.
Well, I'm joined now by the legal officer at the Free Speech Union, Stephen O'Grady. Stephen, welcome to the show. Stephen, it's crazy enough that a highly respected journalist such as Alison Pearson gets the police knocking at her door. It's bad enough that a member of Parliament, Murdo Fraser, for the up in Scotland, got a visit from the police by saying, you've got as much right to call yourself transgender as I have to call myself a cat. But on a serious point, 9-year-old children for using fruity words in the playground, 2 school children here, 2 schoolgirls being reported to the police by saying another pupil smelt like fish. We're not making this up. This is happening. It's ridiculous. Why is it happening and how can we make it stop?
Well, there are a few things that are happening there. The first thing is that we still have this regime of non-crime hate incidents that are being recorded. A couple of years ago, there was statutory guidance that was issued on these things as a result of some of the more outrageous events that had happened there. For example, Harry Miller, who had been investigated by the police for a poem on Twitter. But the problem is this statutory guidance either isn't being taken seriously by police forces or it isn't any good at actually restricting them and ensuring that they only investigate things that either cause significant harm or have real risk of causing significant harm or are a crime or are likely to lead to crime directly. That, you know, a school child can be hauled over the coals for this sort of thing as well. You then have to wonder what's going on at the school, that they see this as a police matter and involve the police in that in the first place. So there are failures up and down the system here, all of which I think just results from people not properly appreciating the importance of free speech and essential liberty around it.
And Stephen, whatever happened to taking a child to one side and saying, listen, son, or look, you used a bit of a fruity word there, that was inappropriate, don't do that again, it means this. Yes. You know, actually helping them to learn by talking to them about things that are wrong. It's called being a child. It's called making mistakes. It's called nurturing, not punishing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And those children who have been subject to this process now are going to grow up with a fear of the police. Their peers are going to have a fear of the police, constantly looking over their shoulder and thinking, well, if I say the wrong thing, I'm going to have my collar felt, I'm going to be hauled in, I'm going to be investigated. So I had best just avoid it. And it doesn't create a very positive image of the police, even in the minds of the child either. They should be, you know, parents, teachers and so on may use the police to illustrate to a child why you don't commit theft, why you don't commit serious crime, not why you don't call somebody a silly name. That's ridiculous.
I think you're absolutely right, and I really do think this could has a potential to deeply traumatise children. No child these days wants to be thought of as being the racist, as being the bad person. A visit from the police because of what you say, I think it's deeply, deeply damaging. Thank you very much for joining us. That's the legal officer at the Free Speech Union, Stephen O'Grady. Always a pleasure. Now, hoping to get a question to the Prime Minister later this afternoon on exactly this topic, and stay with us for that. Still to come, is your dog racist? Now, not make. You might think that this is not a plausible thing, but Labour run Wales have been told to ban dogs from parts of the countryside to make it the outdoors racist. Have they gone barking mad? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. A fine day for many of us out there. A lot of cloud in the sky, but some sunshine in the south as well as across parts of the northeast. But it's going to turn increasingly wet and windy in the far north and northwest for the rest of the day as a cold front sinks south. That's going to introduce a substantial change in the weather during the next few days across the whole of the UK. However, Friday ends with those clear spells in the south, good conditions for viewing the supermoon. And then, under those clear skies, temperatures fall away. A few pockets of frost and fog in the south by dawn. Meanwhile, the cold front sinks south to end up across northern England, where we've got the cloud staying at 7 to 11 Celsius. But a wet start to the day for parts of Cumbria into Yorkshire as that cold front sinks south. And for Northern Ireland and Scotland, behind that cold front, actually we've got a change in the weather on the way. Colder north to northwesterly winds, bringing frequent showers to northern and western Scotland. At lower levels, rain, hail, perhaps some sleet. Over the hills, those showers will be falling as snow, above 200 or 300 metres. Further south, though, we're seeing that cloud and outbreaks of rain sink its way southwards, and as a result increasingly cloudy for much of England and Wales, with outbreaks of rain into North Wales, parts of the Midlands by the afternoon. Some spots of rain to the south of that as the cloud thickens, but nothing substantial. To the north, meanwhile, we've got that change that's already arrived. It's going to feel much colder in the wind, and it will be windy throughout Friday night. Gales for the far north of Scotland. That wind only slowly easing during Saturday. But it's also going to increasingly bring some wintry weather. Initially, snow building up over the tops of the mountains in Scotland, but by Sunday night, that snow will be settling to lower levels. And on Monday, outbreaks of rain for many parts of the country, but the risk of significant hill snow in the...
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, hello, I'm Jules Buckley. There's queues on the westbound M62, so from Ainley Top to Richworth Moor, junction 24 to 22, a collision means it's queuing. A lane shut and around Richworth Moor, heavy fog reported too on the M62. Southbound M1, Sheffield 33 to the M18 at 32, there's a breakdown blocking a lane, naturally causing delays. Somerset, southbound M5, a collision, a lane out and looking slow, 19 down to junction 20, that's Portishead down to Clevedon. Tooting in London, Mitcham Lane between Eden Court Road and Southcroft Road is closed off. There's a building fire, so big delays building. And the A30 in Devon is blocked now in both directions between Yarkham and a Pottery. There's an overturned car, so that's a blockage there both ways, causing delays in both directions too. And for now, that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win Christmas on Us this year. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. We'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text BONUS to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A very, very good afternoon to you and a very happy Friday. It's 4 p.m. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show here on GB News. We're broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK. On today's show, in Brussels, as we speak, EU bureaucrats are planning a bombshell demand for youth mobility as a red line in any deal between the UK and the European Union. Now, that could open Britain to millions of under-30s. Today, for the first time, I reveal the shocking numbers of young Europeans who could pour into Keir Starmer's Britain. They're clucking mad because there are only 5 days to go until thousands of angry farmers descend on Westminster to protest about Labour's disastrous budget, as they call it. On today's show, I'll be joined by a turkey farmer who's spitting feathers because he feels he's been stuffed by Rachel Reeves. And children as young as 9 years old are among thousands of Brits who've been reported to the police for non-crime hate incidents. In one case, 2 schoolgirls were even grilled by cops after saying another pupil smelled of fish. Have we completely and utterly lost the plot when it comes to free speech? Talking of which, is your dog racist? Well, that might sound barking mad, but PC pooch owners are increasingly seeking professional help over anxiety if their dogs bark at people of colour. And Wales are proposing banning dogs from public spaces in case it makes ethnic minorities feel unsafe. On today's show, I'll be joined by a dog trainer for tips on how to make your dog do the right and not the far right thing. Welcome to the show. Always a pleasure to have your company. There'll be no freedom of movement under the Labour Party, no return whatsoever to freedom of movement. Unless it's only 18 to 30-year-olds. It won't harm the economy. In fact, it will bolster it. Think of the opportunity. Think of all the workers we need. It's starting to feel like it's being dressed up as freedom of movement in disguise. That conversation is happening in Brussels today. It's being called a red line by the European Commission of any future reset with deals between Brussels and Britain. And we know Sir Keir Starmer wants to reset that relationship. Is this freedom of movement in disguise? Could this be a complete betrayal of Brexit? That's coming next. Send your views in, gbnews.com/your say. But first, here's your headlines, and it's Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just gone 4 o'clock. These are your headlines from the GB newsroom. 4 teenagers and a 45-year-old man have been convicted of murdering 15-year-old Mason Rist and 16-year-old Max Dixon, who were attacked with machetes in a case of mistaken identity. 18-year-old Riley Tolliver, a 16-year-old boy, a 17-year-old boy and a getaway driver, 45-year-old Anthony Snook, were found guilty of the murders of Mason and Max by a jury of 9 men and 3 women at Bristol Crown Court after a 6-week trial. A 15-year-old boy was also found guilty of the murder of Max after previously pleading guilty to the murder of Mason. Now, a serving Metropolitan Police officer has been sacked after accessing confidential files about the case of Sarah Everard. PC Miles McHugh was among 3 officers who are found to have committed gross misconduct at a 3-week disciplinary tribunal in south-east London. 33-year-old Miss Everard was kidnapped, raped and murdered by the then serving Met officer Wayne Couzens in March of 2021. Now, GB News can reveal that 33,000 small boat migrants have crossed the Channel this year. More than 100 others crossed in 2 small boats today. It comes just a day after the Prime Minister announced the significant arrest of a suspected migrant boat supplier. In other news, the UK's economy barely grew between July and September, with uncertainty about the budget being blamed for the weak growth. It was expected to meet the 0.2% growth figures reported in Germany and Japan, but instead the economy grew by 0.1%. The GDP figures have pushed the UK towards the bottom of the G7 growth table for the 3rd quarter of the year. Chancellor Rachel Reeves says she's not satisfied with the figures.
Of course, I'm not content with the GDP numbers that we've seen today. If everything was fine, we wouldn't be taking the measures that we are to try and unlock the growth that I know exists in the economy but hasn't really been felt, either in living standards or in the competitiveness of our economy these last few years. That's why in my Mansion House speech last night, I set out a number of measures to unlock long-term patient capital from our pension funds to get better returns to savers, but crucially to free up investment to invest in start-up and scale-up businesses and in the opportunities for infrastructure investment in Britain.
Meanwhile, Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride says they're extremely disappointing.
Further evidence that I'm afraid this government has no plan for growth. I mean, in fact, in the budget, as we know, national insurance on employers rocketing up, which is going to be inflationary, depress wages and lead to higher unemployment. So I'm afraid, even if you look at the forecasts that the OBR produced at the time of the budget, that shows lower growth across the forecast than they were forecasting when we were in office back in the spring. So great to talk about growth, but there's a difference between talking about it and actually delivering it.
It comes after Rachel Reeves told city chiefs she plans to create pension megafunds that will power growth in the economy and reward British savers. In her first Mansion House speech as Chancellor, Miss Reeves announced plans for the megafunds, which she said could bring in £80 billion to invest in businesses and infrastructure. She addressed issues of financial instability and promised to make economic growth Labour's, quote, central mission in the coming years. The megafunds will mirror schemes in Australia and Canada, where pension funds take advantage of size to invest in assets that have higher growth potential. And Sir Ed Davey has visited high street businesses calling for a government U-turn on the rise of the bus fare cap. The party leader had been due to take a lesson at a depot in Oxfordshire today and hear concerns from bus company representatives about the £1 hike in the threshold. But instead, he met people at shops in Wantage as the party highlights research suggesting some may avoid travelling to their local high street due to expected fare rises. The £2 cap on single fares that applies on most routes outside of London will be replaced by a new £3 cap until the end of 2025. That was announced by Chancellor Rachel Reeves in the budget. The Lib Dems have called on the government to reverse the move.
They've increased the cap on bus fares from £2 to £3 during a cost of living crisis. People who are really struggling, who depend on the bus to go to work, to go to towns like Wantage, young people to go to their college, they're going to have to pay this extra money and it's going to hit them hard. And when we're trying to get people into public transport, into buses, it's the wrong decision.
Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Martin.
Thank you, Sophia. Now, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is visiting businesses in North Wales this afternoon. We've got some live pictures there where you can see he's currently having a tour of a factory. And this is the usual time when they get their hard hats, their high-vis waistcoats on, and their wellies, and they look like a real working man of the people. Now, we're hoping to speak with the Prime Minister about free speech and also the government's plans to reset our relationship with the European Union. That's Sir Keir Starmer there in Wales at a factory tour, and we'll bring you that when we have it later in the show. Moving on now, in Brussels today, EU bureaucrats are planning a bombshell demand for youth mobility as a red line in any potential deal between the UK and the European Union. But that could open Britain to millions of under-30s. Are we on the road to rejoining the European Union? Well, GB News' political correspondent Catherine Forster spoke to Rachel Reeves about this precise topic earlier today.
And wanting a closer relationship with the European Union in that speech, something that the Governor of the Bank of England talked about as well, in that it had hampered growth, Brexit had hampered growth. How's that going to work? And can you reassure GB News viewers, many of whom voted for Brexit, that Brexit is safe with this government?
However you voted in the referendum, it's undeniable that it is harder for businesses today to trade with our nearest neighbours and trading partners in the European Union. Doesn't mean they're back into the EU or the single market or customs union, but we do need a reset of that relationship because it's in our British national interest to improve trade flows and make it easier for great British businesses to sell into European markets. And that's why next month I'll be attending the Eurogroup finance ministers meeting to make that case in Brussels for free and open trade.
Well, a quick fact check there. Exports to the European Union have actually gone up 44.2% since Brexit. But anyway, let's move on and have a debate about this now. And joining me to discuss this is a former Conservative member of the European Parliament, David Campbell-Bannerman, and also the former Labour spokesman and a great friend of the show, great sport, James Mathieson. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. David Campbell-Bannerman, I'm going to start with you. No return to freedom of movement. We've been continually told since the Labour Party got into power, and yet this word reset keeps emerging, and we know that the reset, at least in terms of what they want in Brussels, one of the terms and conditions of that reset is this much touted youth mobility scheme, ostensibly freedom of movement for the 18 to 30s. David Campbell-Bannerman, what's your take on that?
Well, I think it's one of these, what Boris Johnson called little steps, where they take these little steps towards getting closer and closer to the EU until they can get back in the EU. And I think this is one of those little steps, youth mobility scheme. The question I ask is, why offer this to Europe anyway? I mean, it's coming from the EU, that's granted, but what about the Commonwealth? What about United States? What about looking to the world, rather this Eurocentric view that we must rush into the arms of Europe because Trump has mentioned tariffs and about NATO as well. That's another driver. But no, it worries me because, okay, it's coming from the EU rather than the government, but they could cave into it as they did over reparations in the Commonwealth.
James Mathieson, over to you. Do you think youth mobility scheme would be a good idea?
Two separate things here. Understand what David's just said about, obviously, this notion of little steps and moves towards. And I will be there to say I can imagine for anybody who voted to leave the EU that there are concerns there about, the relationship in the future. However, you want to have a close relationship with your allies regardless. And to put ourselves at the mercy of Donald Trump's America, which is looking increasingly unhinged by some of the appointments that he's put in, especially those who are going to deal with countries overseas, then we put ourselves completely at the mercy of him if we don't have a good relationship with our closest neighbours, of course. So that's a healthy thing. The question of the Labour Party and Keir Starmer's position is a very difficult one. He's resisting this. He does not want this. It makes no political sense for him to accept this or to have it, because the second that he did, people like David, people like yourself, Martin, would say that, this is a complete caving in over Brexit. So politically, he does not want that. However, people like me are the other issue here, and that's that I would quite like to see something like this. And that's because so many young people in this country and so many of our roles in the economy are filled by people under the age of 30. People like me who didn't go to university wouldn't have the opportunity to go to other European countries unless it was for free. And I think people should be able to move between their nations to come and work to fulfill roles like pulling pints in pubs. I live in Edinburgh. It's very multicultural. We're very lucky. But everybody who's doing those jobs here is studying at the same time. We should be able to have young people from across Europe who aren't studying, who are just wanting to come and get a taste of British culture, come and participate in our economy, and crucially, pay tax.
But James Matheson, the problem there is that taking part in our economy means taking jobs from the British working classes. It means suppressing wages. We saw for many, many years, did we not, David, that the wages were suppressed at the bottom, and when we come to students, the fact of the matter is it's a one-way road. A huge amount more people came to Britain for Erasmus than ever went back. It was something like 9,000 per year maximum Brits went over there, but in the end there are over 145,000 European Union students in the UK, so it seems to be like one-way traffic. And isn't the bigger point here, David Campbell-Bannerman, is that the European Union will have put this into their framework, into their deals? Michel Barnier, say what you like about him, he was a master negotiator. Everybody who's keeping an eye on Brexit fears, with some justification, I believe, that these kind of traps will be set for any reset of a deal, and that's the point. So Keir Starmer might not want it, or he might not say he doesn't want it, but it might be foisted upon him.
Well, I think you're right, Martin. I mean, the EU is one big negotiation. They negotiate all the time, every time they meet for councils and ministers like they are today. I think it is one way. That's what worries me. Free movement always benefited the Europeans, the EU, far more than the UK. The Brits are more interested in going to Australia and United States and New Zealand, actually, if you look at the numbers. And we had huge numbers coming in with free movement. Now, the EU has expanded into another 10 nations, Albania, Serbia, Ukraine, potentially. Those are huge numbers, and their youth would be incredibly mobile, incredibly keen to come to UK. So it's an enormous commitment. It's not some sort of, little token exercise. And I'm sorry, I think it needs resisting because it's just a foot in the door. It's back to free movement. I think people despair, including many Labour supporters, James, the Red Wall that you won back, they would be horrified at any move back to free movement.
And I think it's worth, James, having a quick look at the numbers. Around about 45% of everybody who came to the UK from the European Union before Brexit was aged 18 to 30. When you look at the numbers, that equated to between 250,000 and the minimum per year, 212,000 in 2019, the last year, of course, before Brexit. In total, over those post-Brexit years, it was 900,000 people. There's no reason to think it'll be lower than that if it was to rechange, because it'd be like, wait, the doors are open, let's pile in. It could be 1 million people coming to the UK over the course of this Labour government if this goes ahead. That's a heck of a lot of jobs. That's a heck of a lot of our houses. That's a heck of a lot of student accommodation being taken by people from overseas. Is that for Brits?
But those jobs aren't being filled anyway. We just haven't seen a change since Brexit when it comes to it. There hasn't been this sudden uptake in people from the UK filling these positions. They don't want to do them a lot of the time. And they're such, in this country and in our culture, we're so generationally tied to positions and jobs. We see waiting on in restaurants. We see working in bars as something that young people do and something that older people are not willing or accepting to do. And that's a challenge in ourselves that we've got to deal with. But look, having an open kind of movement with young people, the people who are energized, excited, ambitious, the kind of people who want to carry, it's very free market, David, to have people carrying, their independence across borders and saying, I'm going to go to a new country where I don't have a support network. I'm going to build one. I'm going to potentially put down roots and I'm going to contribute to that country's success. We should be opening our arms to those people, I think. And it is a very different way of looking at the world that we have. I understand that. But when you look across the pond to Donald Trump and the maniacs that he's appointing to these positions in the past few days, we should not leave ourselves at the mercy of that man and that country. We should be getting closer to our closest allies.
But the interesting thing about that, though, James Mathewson, is that 8 United States alone combined, the entire economy of 8 out of 50 states is bigger than the entire European Union, and our trade with America dwarfs that of the European Union. But final word to you, David. Keir Starmer has repeatedly said that he won't have a youth mobility scheme, that he won't return to any form of freedom of movement. David Campbell-Bannerman, do you believe him? Do you trust him?
Well, I'm pleased he said that. I hope he holds to that. As I said, I mentioned the reparations example. He was meant to be anti that at the Commonwealth Summit. No, I was going to say, look, the point is, James, and by the way, I commend where you live. Edinburgh is a wonderful place as a student there. But the point is, we've got this pressure on small businesses, particularly pubs and things, with national insurance going up, the contributions going up. I think there will be a surge, unfortunately, in unemployment as a result. And there won't be these gaps. There won't be these opportunities for 1 million plus to come over. And also, when you think minimum wage has gone up, well, that is 4 or 5 times the minimum wage of some of these countries like Albania or Bulgaria. And there's a huge draw there. We've just got to be realistic and control this. And why isn't it open to Americans or the Commonwealth where we have stronger bonds?
OK, gentlemen, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much. Great debate there. David Campbell-Bannerman and James Mathewson. Thank you, gentlemen. Have a fantastic rest of the day. Now, let's return to the breaking news. That GB News can now confirm that 33,000 migrants have crossed the Channel this year. Now, joining us to tell us more is our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, there was one brief day of positive news yesterday. Sir Keir Starmer arrested a Turkish Mr. Big, and now back to business as normal.
Yes, indeed, and our Kent producer working hard to ensure that we're well ahead of the opposition and keeping track of the number of boats that are coming across the English Channel. He tells us now that 122 small boat migrants have made the journey today in 2 small boats. But as we speak, a third small boat is in the English Channel heading towards UK waters. So we could be over 180 for the day so far, and this comes just a day after Sir Keir Starmer stood up and told us of a very significant development, in his words, of the arrest of a 44-year-old Turkish national in the Netherlands who had just landed from Turkey into Amsterdam, a man responsible, according to UK authorities, for supplying a significant number of boats, engines and other equipment to the people smugglers. Well, what the arrivals today show us is that you can take one person out of the picture, you can arrest them and then put them before the courts, but there are plenty of others in that supply chain meeting the demand of the people smugglers, and they are robust, their lines of supply. They have had 6 years to build up an expertise in the way in which they cross the English Channel by these small boats. The boats have got bigger year on year. They have got more robust. They have got better equipped. I mean, it's all relative, Martin, because the people smugglers really don't care too much for the welfare of their passengers. Deaths, of course, are bad for business, but still, they're out there. They are still easily able to manage to get their supply lines, their boats and equipment, even though the UK authorities and others might have their successes.
Thank you, Mark White. Finger on the pulse at the very, very latest information. 122 today, could be on this third boat Mark White just mentioned, as many as 180 today. Thank you, Mark White. Comprehensive, excellent as ever. Thank you, my friend. Now, still to come, I'll be joined by a turkey farmer who's spitting feathers because he feels he's been stuffed by Rachel Reeves. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
This is reported in the Telegraph today, and it's about being white or being coloured or being anti-racist. Is Monopoly a racist game?
This is an incredible story, actually, I have to say. I'm reading this from the Mail. It's in Telegraph as well, but from the Mail. Children should be playing Monopoly to learn about racial privilege, councils claim. While white players should be given more money, spend less time in jail, and also be given a head start on buying property to convey inequality and white supremacy. And this all, I'm not making this up, and this all comes from a document called How to Raise Anti-Racist Children, which was drawn up for the Barbie manufacturer Mattel in 2020, and it's been endorsed, or at least circulated, by Leicestershire County Council, Southampton City Council, Lambeth London Borough and City of London Corporation, who apparently think this is a sensible way to go forward. I mean, for goodness sake, Monopoly is just a bit of fun, isn't it? Let's just enjoy it.
It's a wonderful example of how anti-racist thinking becomes racist. What they're saying is that white children should be given privileges on the Monopoly board.
Because they've got it in real life.
So that they learn that they already have privilege. Do we really think children are going to think that? Or do we really think children are going to think, oh, great, I have an white children are going to think, great, I have an advantage?
They're going to think, oh, no, I've landed on Mayfair and there's 4 houses there.
It's wonderfully stupid.
We've also heard it with nursery rhymes as well, though, haven't we? And mums and dads being told not to sing Bar Bar Black Sheep.
That's in the story as well, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's steeped in white culture. And what a lot of nonsense that is as well.
What are you meant to sing instead?
Well, Bar Bar, I don't know, White Sheep, perhaps, I don't know.
Or Rainbow Sheep or something.
Wah Wah White Sheep. You can say Wah Wah White Sheep as they play Monopoly with their privileges.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:25. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Farmers up and down the country are gearing up to protest against the government's inheritance tax raid on the agricultural sector, and that's on Tuesday coming. And joining me now is the turkey producer of Kelly Turkeys, Paul Kelly. Paul, welcome to the show. Pardon the puns, but you've got to be spitting feathers about this budget.
It came as a big surprise because we had been assured it wasn't going to happen. And then out of the blue, it did happen. It was a shocker. Really was a shocker.
And Paul, in terms of the operations down on your farm, what does it mean in terms of your profit, your losses, your hiring, your entire balance sheet? What will this budget do to you?
Well, if we did have, I mean, the challenge is, of course, as a business, you plan. And cash flow in farming is a huge issue because we're such seasonal businesses. So you have to build up reserves. And we're not so bad, to be honest, because we're not landowners as such. We don't make a living out of farming the land. We make a living out of farming turkeys. The people that it really is going to hurt is those small farmers of 300 or 400 acres. And where the government have got their figures from and who it's going to affect, we do not know. I mean, the NFU obviously know the farming industry inside out. And I think that's the first challenge for the farmer, the NFU and the farming industry to agree that actually the Treasury have got the right figures that they're working on, because we don't believe they have. And of the two, I tend to believe the NFU in terms of knowing what the farming industry, the challenges it's going to have with this tax.
And Paul Kelly, there's a gentleman called Ranjit Singh Boparan. He's known as the Chicken King. You know, he owns the Bernard Matthews estate, £5 billion tycoon. He put a statement out. We're getting him on the show early next week, actually. He said this budget was a disaster for business, and he said will help to deliver a final and fatal blow to thousands of small family-owned farms, particularly chicken farms. So the mood across the nation seems to be very, very bleak. And again, pardon my second pun, happen. A lot of people that own businesses like yours feel that Rachel Reeves has given them a good stuffing.
She absolutely has. You know, I mean, you've got to plan for these things. But, you know, the challenge is farming does not make big money. You know, never in a million years can a farmer generate enough cash out of a farming business to pay big inheritance tax bills. Yes, they do have assets and they have farmland and farm buildings that they can sell like we do. But if we've got to pay a big lump of tax, then we have to sell a building, we have to sell some land. Therefore, our business becomes less efficient because every business needs a certain volume to be efficient. You know, you've got to underpin it. So we would, in our case, we would have to sell a farm. So we have to do less turkeys. So we employ less people. Then we downsize. So we can't afford the tractors. We can't afford the investment. There just isn't enough cash generation in farming to pay big tax bills. It's totally impossible because land prices and building prices are so high and so valuable, it just doesn't make any sense.
And Paul Kelly, I've been speaking to a whole host of farmers, a whole range of different farmers who are coming to the protest just outside here at Westminster next Tuesday. Some of them are saying they're thinking about going on strike. They're thinking about choking the supply off to make an impact. It's Christmas. It's turkey time. Surely, please don't tell us there'll be any chance that Rachel Reeves could be the Grinch this Christmas that stops me getting my turkey with all the trimmings.
No, that's not going to happen. Don't worry. Actually, I can't go up to Westminster on Tuesday because I'm busy plucking Thanksgiving turkeys. So we're in full production, and that's not going to happen. There's going to be turkeys this Christmas, that's for sure.
Good stuff for you. But on a serious point, a lot of people are coming to London next week, and we don't want to see any trouble. We don't want to see any aggro whatsoever. We're not the Gilets jaunes. We're the Brits. We want to do this correctly.
Exactly.
But I have heard about farmers who are going to be taking their shirts off and hanging them on the railings at Westminster to say, basically, here are the shirts off our back. This is what you're taking to us. So there is a great deal of drama out there, a great deal of concern, and a great deal of anger, Paul Kelly, towards this government by the farming community.
Absolutely right, and because the government have got it wrong. They have genuinely got their figures wrong. This figure of £1 million, and then you can maybe with two farming you get £3 million. 300-acre farm is worth £3 million now, and you're struggling to make a living out of 300 acres. There are thousands and thousands of farmers that are going to lose their family farm that have been there for 3 or 4 generations and have to sell 100 acres to pay the bill. Then you can't even keep the son or daughter on the farm because there just isn't the volume, enough land there to farm from. So it's an absolutely bizarre situation, and we just have no idea what figures the government are working on because they don't make any sense at all. But, they're not going to want to be seen to be doing a U-turn at this early stage in the government, will they? That's the problem, I guess.
Now,
I'm not a politician.
Paul Kelly, well, good for you, mate. Now, Paul Kelly, that's a nice little bird you got on the counter behind you there. Tell us, is that one of your birds behind you?
Yeah, well, actually, that's we've got a little farm in Virginia, in America. We've just started out there, and I'm doing a live show cooking and carving a turkey for NBC News.
Beautiful stuff. Well, it looks like an absolute beauty of a bird. Can't wait to get my teeth stuck into a turkey this Christmas. Fantastic stuff. That's Paul Kelly, the turkey producer of Kelly Turkeys in Essex. Get in touch and let's get some of his birds on your table this Christmas. Wonderful. Now, earlier on, we put these concerns to the Chancellor Rachel Reeves, and here's what she told GB News earlier.
If you're a couple who own a farm, including a home on the farm, you can pass on £3 million tax-free to the next generation. And beyond that £3 million, you are taxed at half of the rate that everybody else is taxed for inheritance tax, at 20% compared to 40%. And where there is an inheritance tax bill, you can pay that over 10 years interest-free in a way that no one else paying inheritance tax can. So I think this is a fair deal for farmers, whilst also ensuring that we bring in the money to get our public finances back on a firm footing.
That's the Chancellor Rachel Reeves earlier on. We just told they will not be taking your Christmas turkey away. Now, lots more still to come between now and 5 o'clock. Now, who's going to win, Mike Tyson or Jake Paul? On behalf of all old blokes out there, come on, I'm Team Tyson. But first is your latest news headlines, and it's Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. Good afternoon. These are your headlines at 4:32. 4 teenagers and a 45-year-old man have been convicted of murdering 15-year-old Mason Rist and 16-year-old Max Dixon, who were attacked with machetes in a case of mistaken identity. 18-year-old Riley Tolliver and 16-year-old boy and a 17-year-old boy and a getaway driver, 45-year-old Anthony Snook, were found guilty of the murders of Mason and Max by a jury of 9 men and 3 women at Bristol Crown Court after a 6-week trial. A 15-year-old boy was also found guilty of the murder of Max after previously pleading guilty to the murder of Mason. A serving Metropolitan Police officer has been sacked after accessing confidential files about the case of Sarah Everard. PC Miles McHugh was among 3 officers who were found to have committed gross misconduct at a 3-week disciplinary tribunal in South East London. 33-year-old Miss Everard was kidnapped, raped and murdered by the then serving Met officer Wayne Cousins in March of 2021. GB News can now confirm that 33,000 small boat migrants have crossed the Channel this year. More than 100 others crossed in small boats today. It comes just a day after the Prime Minister announced the significant arrest of a suspected migrant boat supplier. In other news, the UK's economy barely grew between July and September, with uncertainty about the budget being blamed for the weak growth. It was expected to meet the same 0.2% growth figures reported in Germany and Japan, but instead the economy grew by 0.1%. The GDP figures have pushed the UK towards the bottom of the G7 growth table for the 3rd quarter of the year. Chancellor Rachel Reeves said she's not satisfied with the figures.
Of course, I'm not content with the GDP numbers that we've seen today. If everything was fine, we wouldn't be taking the measures that we are to try and unlock the growth that I know exists in the economy but hasn't really been felt, either in living standards or in the competitiveness of our economy these last few years. That's why in my Mansion House speech last night, I set out a number of measures to unlock long-term patient capital from our pension funds to get better returns to savers, but crucially to free up investment to invest in start-up and scale-up businesses and in the opportunities for infrastructure investment in Britain.
Meanwhile, Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride says they're extremely disappointing.
Further evidence that I'm afraid this government has no plan for growth. I mean, in fact, in the budget, as we know, national insurance on employers rocketing up, which is going to be inflationary, depress wages and lead to higher unemployment. So I'm afraid, even if you look at the forecasts that the OBR produced at the time of the budget, that shows lower growth across the forecast than they were forecasting when we were in office back in the spring. So great to talk about growth, but there's a difference between talking about it and actually delivering it.
Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. A fine day for many of us out there. A lot of cloud in the sky, but some sunshine in the south as well as across parts of the northeast. But it's going to turn increasingly wet and windy in the far north and northwest for the rest of the day as a cold front sinks south. That's going to introduce a substantial change in the weather during the next few days across the whole of the UK. However, Friday ends with those clear spells in the south, good conditions for viewing the supermoon. And then, under those clear skies, temperatures fall away. A few pockets of frost and fog in the south by dawn. Meanwhile, the cold front sinks south to end up across northern England, where we've got the cloud staying at 7 to 11 Celsius. But a wet start to the day for parts of Cumbria into Yorkshire as that cold front sinks south. And for Northern Ireland and Scotland, behind that cold front, actually we've got a change in the weather on the way. Colder north to northwesterly winds, bringing frequent showers to northern and western Scotland. At lower levels, rain, hail, perhaps some sleet. Over the hills, those showers will be falling in snow, above 200 or 300 metres. Further south, though, we're seeing that cloud and outbreaks of rain sink its way southwards, and as a result, increasingly cloudy for much of England and Wales, with outbreaks of rain into North Wales, parts of the Midlands by the afternoon. Some spots of rain to the south of that as the cloud thickens, but nothing substantial. To the north, meanwhile, we've got that change that's already arrived. It's going to feel much colder in the wind, and it will be windy throughout Friday night. Gales for the far north of Scotland. That wind only slowly easing during Saturday. But it's also going to increasingly bring some wintry weather. Initially, snow building up over the tops of the mountains in Scotland, but by Sunday night, that snow will be settling to lower levels. And on Monday, outbreaks of rain for many parts of the country, but the risk of significant hill snow in the north.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Still queuing on the westbound M62 this afternoon, so Ainley top 2, Rishworth Moor, junction 24 to 22. A collision means long queues and a lane closure remains in place. A lane shut 2 on the southbound M1, Sheffield to the M18. That's junction 33 to 32. A breakdown causing delays there. A collision southbound M6, Stoke at 16, down towards the Kiel services. Takes about 20 minutes to get past the scene of a collision there. Lane 103 is currently coned off. A collision as well on the southbound M5 in Somerset. It's slow going. A lane shut Portishead to junction 19 down to Clevedon at 20. And then to Somerset in Frome, the A361 is currently shut between the Beckington turning to the Premier Inn and vice versa. Delays there at the scene of an accident. And for now, that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Welcome back. Your time is 4:39. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, children as young as 9 years old are among the people being probed by police over insults in the school playground and even posts online. Is this a complete waste of police time? Well, earlier, GB News' political correspondent Catherine Forster put that precise question to the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves.
To ensure that there are 13,000 neighbourhood police officers and community support officers in our local areas, ensuring that our town centres and our high streets are safe and that people feel that they can go out in the evenings and feel safe in their local communities. That's the priority for police in Britain, and that's the priority of this Labour government.
So you don't think they should be investigating 9-year-olds' comments?
I don't think that is...
Well, joining me now is the free speech advocate, Professor Frank Furedi. Frank, welcome to the show. Always a pleasure. It's been way too long. Look, it's bad enough when very, very well-respected journalists such as Alison Pearson get a tug from the old bill for posting something online. But seriously, what planet are we on when 9-year-old children who use fruity words and 2 girls from a comprehensive school got a visit from the police because they said that another pupil smelled like fish? For that, the police are being called and these girls are getting a grilling from the police. Have we completely and utterly lost the plot?
Well, I think we have. There is no doubt about the fact that when you treat young children, 9-year-old children, as if they were potential adult criminals, I mean, you cannot make a distinction between the banter that young kids engage in and serious threats to people's lives and security, then you know we have a big problem. And I think what I find fascinating is that the further we are away from real crime, real serious crimes, the more the police seems to be invested in investigating it. So they're much more interested in dealing with cultural issues, cultural conflict, personal interaction, and the problems that that causes. They used to be called acts of miscommunication. They're more interested in that than in actually dealing with the many problems that we have facing our security. And that is a huge problem because it tells us that when it comes to people's speech and the way they talk and the way they think, this has now become a terrain where the police feel very comfortable in acting.
And Frank, you will well know Harry Miller went to court and this was meant to be over. These non-crime hate incidents, they were meant to be consigned to the dustbin of history, but police forces are stubbornly hanging on to them. Over 250,000 people, we heard from the Free Speech Union yesterday, have had these issued against them. They can taint people's careers. They're a blot against their good name. They can destroy their lives. They can stop them from getting jobs. And now children are being drawn into this dragnet. What on earth needs to be done to get rid of them?
Well, you know, this is not going to stop anytime soon because once the dynamic has been created and once the police know that this is a very virtuous act that they're involved in. The only way that you can stop it is if you have a very, very strong signal being communicated by Parliament. You need basically a government that is thoroughly committed to free speech, thoroughly committed to putting an end to this. There's no ambiguities about this. You're not going to say if and when, but basically you're going to say it's out of the question that the phenomenon of a non-crime hate incident is going to exist. The very invention of this idea of non-crime hate incident is an insult to our intelligence, but it's also a threat to our security. So this has got to be stopped in the most unambiguous terms. And at the moment, none of the governments, none of the politicians have stood up to be counted.
Frank, my next and final question is, do you think this is going to get worse before it gets better? Because we seem to have a government at the moment. We've seen people imprisoned over Facebook posts during the Southport riots and the aftermath. We're seeing, I think, a ramping up of this legislation being enforced when we all thought it was being put into the dustbin. As I said, do you think, as I fear, that this could get worse?
No doubt it will get worse, because you have to remember that running in parallel with this is also this prevent strategy, which is increasingly focused on school children. So instead of dealing with real-life terrorists who are radicalized and represent a threat to the nation's security, they're kind of hoovering the classrooms, and they're looking for the remarks that 9, 10, 12, 13, 14-year-old kids make, and treating them like potential terrorists rather than as sort of confused children. So when you have this kind of what I call the adultification of children so deeply embedded in our policing strategy, then I think it's inevitable that this problem, unfortunately, is going to run and run.
Well, I've got to say, Professor Frank Fraddy, I think you're right. I'm sad to say I think you're right. I think this is going to get much worse before it gets any better. Thank you very much for joining us for your insights. Superb as ever. Now it's Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul in the boxing showdown of the century, some might say. But who's going to win? We'll have all of the analysis next. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Catherine Richards and Jake Singleton-Hill featured on the reality show Love is Blind.
Well, Catherine and Jake are joining us now in the studio for Saturday Morning Live. Thank you very much for joining us. And this is perhaps not the end result that people might have thought that they'd be seeing at this point, because you were both on the show, but you didn't fall in love in the pods, did you?
No,
we didn't.
I rejected him.
You guys look great together.
Yeah.
Very, very
Thank
happy
you.
as well. It seemed like you guys were really strong, and it almost seemed like Freddie, after he admitted to you that he'd cheated in the past.
I actually respected the fact that he told me up front. I didn't even want to have that conversation, obviously. That was a conversation that we got told to talk about. And I respected his decision, but I think he felt that I was holding this grudge towards him that she really doesn't like, and which was not, and he knew this, because off camera we had many conversations where I was like, thank you for owning up, like, we can just move on from this. But if anything, I think he just felt guilty the whole entire time, and he put that on me, which is fine, but yeah, there's obviously a lot that people don't see.
So for viewers who don't know, Love is Blind is where you go and seek love and romance, but you don't see who you're speaking to, right?
No.
So, Jake, why did you go on the show?
My parents actually met in a very similar way. So my stepdad was texting my mum. He'd basically stolen the number off of a friend because the friend had met my mum in Blackpool, and they were texting for like 6 months. They'd never met. So that premise of how they got together and the marriage that they had was stunning. And to build a relationship not based on looks before you met, I just found that just incredible.
So do you believe in that concept? Is it lust or love at first sight?
It's weird.
It's a bit of both.
I think, it's definitely a bit of both. And I always say, as you get older, your looks will change, but your personality will stay the same.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Time is 4:48. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, it's not long to go now until the YouTuber Jake Paul faces off against the boxing legend, some say the greatest heavyweight of all time, Mike Tyson, for a hugely controversial fight in Dallas. And joining us now to discuss this enticing prospect is the boxing deputy editor of the Sporting News, Tom Gray. Tom, welcome to the show. It's a very, very unlikely setup in the age of YouTube boxing head-to-heads. It's massively exciting. Who do you think's going to win? I mean, of course, Tyson is the man, the legend, but the young YouTuber Jake Paul's got youth on his side. How do you think it's going to go?
Well, Martin, I don't have the slightest clue. Usually you would go on the form guides, but there is no form because Mike Tyson hasn't had a fight for 20 years. He's 58 years old, grandfather, and he was shot to pieces 20 plus years ago, whereas Jake Paul is a novice pro, not a very good one. So I get absolutely no idea who is going to win it. The whole thing smacks of WWE histrionics with boxing gloves. No idea.
What's interesting about this is the bookies have actually got Jake Paul down as quite considerably the favourite in this. They're going on the side of youth, and there's a picture here, a video here of them coming together. Tyson, in another video, slaps him round the chops, and he's got he's got his top off. In fact, here it comes now. Look, Tyson, got to say, he looks absolutely in the look at that Bosch. Absolutely looks in the shape of his life, even though he's 58. He's still got that killer physique there. He's still got a huge core, Tom Gray. And I saw another video of Tyson looking at Jake Paul bad-mouthing him, and he said, he's a manufactured killer. I'm a natural-born killer. Do you think that raw talent, that power, that aggression, that Darth Vader mentality could be enough for the old boy to take it?
As much as that was a brilliant build-up, by the way, you should do that for a career. But the bottom line is he's still got dulled reflexes. He's still an old man. I watched Mike Tyson win the heavyweight championship of the world for the first time in 1986. I was 11 years old. I turned 50 in April. So that tells you all you need to know. He's got a fantastic physique. He keeps in good shape. But there's a difference between being in shape and being in shape to fight. And I just think a young man, look, if Mike Tyson was any kind of threat, do you think Jake Paul would be in there with him in the first place?
Well, presumably there are many multiple millions of reasons why they're all doing it. I mean, how much are they getting paid for this spectacle? Do you know?
I don't know the actual purses, but it's insane money. I think it's an indictment against 21st century thought and reasoning that you can take a 27-year-old YouTuber who is not very good at boxing and match him against a 58-year-old grandfather and cut up millions. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be a magnificent, huge, colossal financial success. But when the drama coalesces in the ring, you'll be waking up on Saturday morning wondering what all the fuss was about.
Well, Tom Gray, not that I would encourage gambling, but it's 9.5 to 1 for Mike Tyson to end this inside 3 rounds. I think that's worth a nibble. I got a couple of quid on that, and maybe I'm even older than you, mate. No, I'm 54. He's just a bit older than me. For all the old blokes out there, I'd like him to do it. It's a fascinating prospect. It's very, very unusual. Expert analysis. Thanks for joining us there. And that's Tom Gray, the deputy editor of the Sporting News. Thank you very, very much. Ding, ding.
Thanks, Mark.
Now then, good lad. Now here's one for you. Is your dog racist? Now you might think that this is a barking mad thing to say, but it's an actual serious story. It's happening. It's not April the 1st. It's happening because the Welsh Labour Party have been told to ban dogs from outdoor spaces to make them more inclusive. And you've been sending in your pictures of your dogs, and I've got to say, some very, very funny and some very, very fruity comments on our social media feed. Let's have a quick look now at a couple of your dogs. Here's Tony with his pooch. He sent a message which I won't repeat on TV. He said, my dog isn't racist, but he doesn't like Labour Party politicians. But what a wonderful dog there, and what a wonderful setting. Marvellous. And this one particularly caught my eye. It's wonderful. This is from Reece. Reece just sent this to me directly on social media. He said, here's Poppy and Snoop with their friend Patrick, who apparently they adore. Reece said that whenever Patrick shows up, their dog, his dogs go absolutely bonkers, even if they haven't seen him in years. They adore Patrick and they just jump over him. They are wonderful dogs. And that debate is coming up in the next hour. Isn't it astonishing that this is even a thing? It's an actual report commissioned by the Welsh Labour Party because they've vowed to end racism in Wales by 2030. And so they wrote a paper, and one of the recommendations was to ban dogs from certain outdoor spaces because apparently one African woman in this report that I've read said she felt unsafe around dogs. And with that recommendation, the Welsh government, has said that dogs should be taken from outdoor spaces. This isn't a spoof. It's happening, and we'll be debating it in the next hour. So make sure you get your views in on that. And as I said, I'll be joined by a top dog trainer, because here's the thing. People are actually taking their dogs for training to make them less racist. I wish I was making this up. It's not. They want their dogs to do the right thing and not the far right thing. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel. Now here's your weather, and it's Aidan McGibbon.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. A fine day for many of us out there. A lot of cloud in the sky, but some sunshine in the south as well as across parts of the northeast. But it's going to turn increasingly wet and windy in the far north and northwest for the rest of the day as a cold front sinks south. That's going to introduce a substantial change in the weather during the next few days across the whole of the UK. However, Friday ends with those clear spells in the south, good conditions for viewing the supermoon. And then, under those clear skies, temperatures fall away. A few pockets of frost and fog in the south by dawn. Meanwhile, the cold front sinks south to end up across northern England, where we've got the cloud staying at 7 to 11 Celsius. But a wet start to the day for parts of Cumbria into Yorkshire as that cold front sinks south. And for Northern Ireland and Scotland, behind that cold front, actually we've got a change in the weather on the way. Colder north to northwesterly winds, bringing frequent showers to northern and western Scotland. At lower levels, rain, hail, perhaps some sleet. Over the hills, those showers will be falling as snow, above 200 or 300 metres. Further south, though, we're seeing that cloud and outbreaks of rain sink its way southwards, and as a result increasingly cloudy for much of England and Wales, with outbreaks of rain into North Wales, parts of the Midlands by the afternoon. Some spots of rain to the south of that as the cloud thickens, but nothing substantial. To the north, meanwhile, we've got that change that's already arrived. It's going to feel much colder in the wind, and it will be windy throughout Friday night. Gales for the far north of Scotland. That wind only slowly easing during Saturday. But it's also going to increasingly bring some wintry weather. Initially, snow building up over the tops of the mountains in Scotland, but by Sunday night, that snow will be settling to lower levels. And on Monday, outbreaks of rain for many parts of the country, but the risk of significant hill snow in the...
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Let's go to the southeast of Middlesbrough firstly. The westbound A174 is currently shut from the Greystones roundabout in Lazenby through towards the A171 at Ormsby. Now that is due to a collision looking very slow going. As it is westbound on the M62, although all lanes are back open now, follows a previous bump there from junction 24 to 22, so heading towards Rushworth Moor. Southbound M6, a couple of issues this afternoon, 18 to 17, Middlewich down towards Crewe, lane 1's combed off and queuing at the scene of a collision. Once you pass there southbound, 16 at Stoke down to the Kiel Services lane, one's coned off there. That's slow at the scene of a collision too. And delay still on the southbound M5 in Somerset, a lane out slow going. There's been a collision, Portishead 19 to Clevedon Junction 20. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win Christmas on Us this year. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. We'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A very, very good afternoon to you. It's 5 p.m. Hope you're having a cracking Friday. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News. Of course, we're broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster for you and all across the UK. On today's show, in Brussels today, EU bureaucrats are planning a bombshell demand for youth mobility. That's a red line in any deal between the UK and the European Union. Now, that could open Britain to millions of under-30s. Today, for the first time, I'll reveal the shocking numbers of young Europeans who could pour into Keir Starmer's Britain. And there are only 5 days to go now until thousands of angry farmers descend on Westminster to protest about what they call Labour's disastrous budget. I'll be crossing to Lancashire, where farmers are absolutely furious. Now, this one has really got you barking mad. Is your dog racist? Now, that might sound bonkers, but apparently Welsh Labour are actually thinking about banning dogs from public spaces to make them more inclusive. It's utterly bonkers, but I'll be joined by a dog trainer for tips on how to make your dog do the right and not the far right thing. That's all coming up in the next hour. Welcome to the show. Always a pleasure to have your company. Are dogs racist is a headline. I had to pinch myself. It's not April the 1st. It's actually a thing. The Welsh Labour Party, the government there, have commissioned a report to actually say that outdoor spaces are less welcoming to people of colour if dogs are barking. That's right. Dogs are racist. Dogs are putting people off. Everything's racist, the countryside, and now dogs, especially in the countryside, and particularly if they're Welsh dogs. I've been inundated with pictures of your dogs. We're going to share plenty of them in the hour and some very, very funny comments. Thank you very much for that. There's still time to send a picture of your pooch in. If you want them on GB News, you know what to do. gbnews.com/your say. There's loads to go in this final hour, but before all of that, here's Sophia Wenzer with your headlines.
Martin, thank you. It's just gone 5 o'clock. These are your top stories from the GB newsroom. 4 teenagers and a 45-year-old man have been convicted of murdering 15-year-old Mason Rist and 16-year-old Max Dixon, who were attacked with machetes in a case of mistaken identity. 18-year-old Riley Tolliver, a 16-year-old boy, a 17-year-old boy and a getaway driver, 45-year-old Anthony Snook, were found guilty of the murders of Mason and Max by a jury of 9 men and 3 women at Bristol Crown Court after a 6-week trial. A 15-year-old boy was also found guilty of the murder of Max after previously pleading guilty to the murder of Mason. A serving Metropolitan Police officer has been sacked after accessing confidential files about the case of Sarah Everard. PC Miles McHugh was among 3 officers who were found to have committed gross misconduct at a 3-week disciplinary tribunal in South East London. 33-year-old Miss Everard was kidnapped, raped and murdered by the then serving Met officer Wayne Cousins in March of 2021. GB News can now confirm that 33,000 small boat migrants have crossed the Channel this year. More than 100 others crossed in 2 small boats today. It comes just a day after the Prime Minister announced the significant arrest of a suspected migrant boat supplier. And in other news, the UK's economy barely grew between July and September, with uncertainty about the budget being blamed for the weak growth. It was expected to meet the same 0.2% growth figures reported in Germany and Japan, but instead the economy grew by 0.1%. The GDP figures have pushed the UK towards the bottom of the G7 growth table for the 3rd quarter of the year. Chancellor Rachel Reeves says she's not satisfied with the figures.
Of course, I'm not content with the GDP numbers that we've seen today. If everything was fine, we wouldn't be taking the measures that we are to try and unlock the growth that I know exists in the economy but hasn't really been felt either in living standards or in the competitiveness of our economy these last few years. That's why in my Mansion House speech last night, I set out a number of measures to unlock long-term patient capital from our pension funds to get better returns to savers, but crucially to free up investment, to invest in start-up and scale-up businesses and in the opportunities for infrastructure investment in Britain.
Meanwhile, Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride says they're extremely disappointing.
Further evidence that I'm afraid this government has no plan for growth. I mean, in fact, in the budget, as we know, national insurance on employers rocketing up, which is going to be inflationary, depress wages and lead to higher unemployment. So I'm afraid, even if you look at the forecasts that the OBR produced at the time of the budget, that shows lower growth across the forecast than they were forecasting when we were in office back in the spring. So great to talk about growth, but there's a difference between talking about it and actually delivering it.
It comes after Rachel Reeves told City Chiefs she plans to create pension megafunds that will power growth in the economy and reward British savers. In her first Mansion House speech as Chancellor, Miss Reeves announced plans for the megafunds, which she said could bring in £80 billion to invest in businesses and infrastructure. She addressed issues of financial instability and promised to make economic growth Labour's, quote, central mission in the coming years. The megafunds will mirror schemes in Australia and Canada, where pension funds take advantage of size to invest in assets that have higher growth potential. And the Duke of Sussex is one of the 2 claimants whose claims are still live against the publisher of The Sun over allegations of unlawful information gathering. This is what his barrister told the High Court. A hearing today heard that Harry and former Labour deputy leader Tom Watson are now the only people continuing their claims against News Group newspapers after several others settled their cases. The 2 remaining cases are expected to go to trial in January, with Harry alleging he was targeted by journalists and private investigators working for NGN, which also published the now defunct News of the World. The publisher has previously denied unlawful activity took place at The Sun. And in sport, boxing champion Mike Tyson slapped Jake Paul at a charged weigh-in for tonight's controversial heavyweight fight in Texas. After both men had weighed in, Paul crawled across the floor before rising up to Tyson's eye line for the traditional final head-to-head. 58-year-old Tyson then slapped his opponent across the face, prompting security and team members to rush in to separate the fighters. Paul, however, seemed unfazed. Instead, he blew kisses at the former champion. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Martin.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sophia. Now, in Brussels today, EU bureaucrats are planning a bombshell demand for youth mobility as a red line in any deal between the UK and the European Union. And that could open Britain to millions of under-30s, as it did before Brexit. Now, are we on the road to rejoining the EU? Well, GB News political correspondent Catherine Forster spoke to Rachel Reeves about this earlier on today.
Mentioned wanting a closer relationship with the European Union in that speech, something that the Governor of the Bank of England talked about as well, in that it had hampered growth, Brexit had hampered growth. How's that going to work? And can you reassure GB News viewers, many of whom voted for Brexit, that Brexit is safe with this government?
However you voted in the referendum, it's undeniable that it is harder for businesses today to trade with our nearest neighbours and trading partners in the European Union. Doesn't mean go back into the EU or the single market or customs union, but we do need a reset of that relationship because it's in our British national interest to improve trade flows and make it easier for great British businesses to sell into European markets. And that's why next month I'll be attending the Eurogroup finance ministers meeting to make that case in Brussels for free and open trade.
Just a quick fact check on the Chancellor there. By my sources, actually, exports to the European Union are 44.2% up since Brexit. But I digress, because joining me now in the studio to discuss a return of a youth mobility scheme, potentially, is the former Labour MP and the Minister of the State for Europe, Dennis McShane, and the Research Director at the Centre for Migration Control, Robert Bates. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Dennis, I'm going to start with you as a lover, has to be said, of the European Union. This is precisely the kind of thing that you would like to see happen. There we go. This is precisely the sort of thing that you would like to see happen. The big question is, despite what the Labour Party keeps saying, do you think it's the kind of thing that they would like to see happen?
Well, the Labour Party is quite clear, as indeed is the whole country. We took a decision in 2016. It was ratified, in my judgment, in 2017 and 2019 at two general elections. The election earlier this year, a bit more difficult, massive majority for Labour, Lib Dems, Greens, SNP, all of whom, as MPs, proclaimed that they would like a better relationship with Europe. They hate the xenophobia, the ugly anti-European language emanating from Boris Johnson, Kemi Badenoch, Sarah Braverman and the rest. But we have the same deal with Australia, Canada, Japan, South Korea. What's wrong with having a few French or Poles in England again?
Well, if only it were a few. And isn't that the point? Because when you look at the numbers, if we go back in time to 2016 to 2019, those post-Brexit years, actually for every single year, it was over 200,000 that came in of 18 to 30s, because if I'm correct in saying, Rob Bates, it's around about 40, 45, 50% of all immigrants that came from the EU were in this age bracket. So if there were to be a fresh revisit of this scheme, potentially that's millions of people could come here.
Yeah, so the Freedom of Movement institution was fundamentally one that was mostly used by those be falling within the remit of a youth mobility scheme. I think, as you say, about 50%, best estimates suggest those that were coming in from the continent are in that age bracket and coming from places like Bulgaria and Poland. It's an even higher percentage of those that are entering the UK. This proposal would be slightly different from the proposals that Dennis just set out, because ultimately Europe is just next door. It's only a hop, skip and a jump away from us. So the idea is that we'd be seeing similar numbers via this scheme scheme that we'd be seeing via those countries on the other side of the world just simply isn't the case. In fact, this would actually reopen the debate on freedom of movement, and it would start conversations about, what can we do to liberalise seasonal workers even further, and it would be the start of a process that I think the Labour Party would be all too happy to succumb to, that would see us ultimately effectively back in the freedom of movement institution.
Dennis, isn't that the point? As soon as we get a taste for freedom of movement, or it might be a few students to start with, before we know it, it'll be open season and we'd be basically returning back to freedom of movement without a say on it, without a vote.
Freedom of movement was freedom of movement. This scheme says you must have a visa, you must have a job, you probably have to have...
They dish them out willy-nilly at the moment to students, to workers from abroad.
Bring in your own health insurance. I like the idea that British young people could once again discover Europe. My generation did, your generation
They still
did.
can.
Well, with a lot more difficulty. It's not the same as going to work for a year, going to be a ski tutor or a nanny, or really learning the language as well. So it would be visa-based, completely different, Rob, from freedom of movement, which required no visa at all. You'd have to have a visa before you came here.
But I think the point is that if we were to suddenly make this option available to those businesses that we already know are far too happy to shirk their obligations to the British workforce, and say to them, if you are having shortages, rather than having to pay your staff more, rather than having to train your staff more, you can just reach across the pond and pull across people from the continent. It's something that we know for a fact that the current business climate is all too happy to accept. We've got 9.5 million people in this country that are economically inactive. We've got students that have summers where they're not doing anything. And these are the kind of opportunities that we need to be looking to advance. We need to be looking to get the British workforce into place rather than just simply relying on European.
We have had about 2 months, when was the budget? A month ago, non-stop rows by employers about just paying a little bit more to Social Security. We as a country have an employer group. The employers pay the lowest share of Social Security of any country in Europe. Now, what you're actually articulating, I think, is, and I mean, Mrs Thatcher destroyed training and apprenticeships, and no Prime Minister's brought it back. Completely agree with you on that. But if I'm going to announce here, oh, by the way, we want every employer to increase pay or Deliveroo or a small cafe by 20%. I know how popular I'll be with the British Chambers of Commerce and the CBI. And
so the alternative then is to import endless cheap labour and cut wages or artificially suppress them. The whole point of Brexit was that the working classes, who are the most impacted by this, not the middle classes, but they like cheap nannies, they like cheap cleaners, they like cheap labour on their farms, whatever it is. The working classes who want those jobs can't afford to do them. They get priced out of the market and get stuffed on the dole.
The working class also likes the knock on the door once a day from Amazon, or that there's cheap and nice restaurants and pubs, and certainly working farmers who've been hard hit by Brexit, independently of all the inheritance issue, had huge damage because you won't get your average Brit to go out at 6 o'clock in the morning and do that work. Now,
well, you won't if the companies aren't incentivised to actually make it an attractive offer. And we see this in particular in the healthcare sector, which is, I just imagine would be a large part of this as well. People would be coming into work in that sector. Is that these companies just simply shirking obligations? They aren't paying enough. They're not doing enough to incentivise people. They're not providing little quirks and perks with the job. They're not doing simply enough to incentivise the British workforce to enter. And if we start going down this route, it really is a case of where does this end? If we are simply reliant on our politicians bending the knee to EU's demands, you can just see it's a take and take and take. And the bigger point here is, what is the democratic mandate for Labour to actually pursue this? We know that we voted to leave the European Union primarily because we wanted control of our borders. We voted time and time again for people to take back control of our borders, those in power, and they've not done so. But what is the mandate for this?
We were told, I was just looking at Martin Gwynne and lots of other, Liam Halligan, saying, well, now we've left the European Union, a golden era of prosperity will open for Britain. We have now got declining growth. You've heard the Governor of the Bank of England expressing deep concern, and he knows the state of finances. When you cut off trade, you do yourself damage. I must say, Rafi...
You also do damage by hiking national insurance contributions to cripple business, putting up minimum wages...
he just wants minimum wages to rock it.
No, but if you increase the minimum wage and then you import hundreds of thousands of people who are prepared to take the minimum wage, it means that the wage stays where it is. That's what happened prior to Brexit.
I thought Robert was sounding like me, as a lifelong trade unionist, saying that bosses should put up pay. pay. Hooray, welcome to that club. Now,
but where's the incentive for them to do so if they can just reach across, pull that lever, before you know it, endless number of people that just happen to...
years without pulling that lever. What's happened is last year, Kemi Badenoch, Robert Jenrick, all the crowd now in the shadow cabinet imported 654,000 people from Nigeria, India, Pakistan, the Philippines to do the jobs that Catholic Poles or whatever were doing previously. Now, if you know a country in the world that doesn't have some foreign labour, I'd love to know its name.
We saw with the OECD, didn't we, recently? We saw it yesterday, in fact, that the UK is way, way above any semblance of normality on this issue. We are far above the average number that you'd see in these other advancing countries in terms of our reliance on immigration.
Tell me what the percentage of immigrants is in Britain, Rob, or immigration.
It's about 16%.
No, it's 13%. Tell me what...
It's not 16%. Foreign-born nationals are 16%. No, well, that might be from times gone by, but I'm afraid that's wrong.
Those are the latest figures. What is the share of immigration in Europe's richest country? Do you know what it is?
Well, look, you tell me. You tell me.
Martin, you know...
Go on, mate. It's not a pub quiz.
Well,
tell us the answer. Let's have a debate.
The richest country by far in Europe is Switzerland, and the share...
Yeah, and they go over the border daily, and they go out daily, and they have a safe, controlled border. They know exactly who people are. They fingerprint them. I know this because we had a Swiss dignitary to come and see us in Brussels. It's completely and utterly different.
Martin, I drove every day across the border from France into Switzerland to work, and my fingers are as clean now as they were then. This is complete nonsense. So that's a small percentage. They're called frontalier. That means going across a frontier. Tiny percentage, but 27% Swiss population are immigrants, and they've had a popular... Wait a minute.
Sorry, just to clarify, because I think you're going off on a bit of a tangent here. The
but it's a tiny nation in comparison with Britain. It's tiny.
As Martin says, these are short-term. These are people that are going there for a season, cropping across the border. But we're talking about permanent, long-term visas here. This mobility scheme would be at least 2 years, and it'd be an open door for people.
2 years is long-term. 2 years is nothing.
But what I'm saying is it would then lead to a pathway for long-term settlement. We've seen that time and again, which happens with these visa schemes once they're introduced. They become a backdoor for other people to then start applying for long-term residency.
Gents, I want to get a quick couple of charts on the screen to talk about Erasmus, something that Labour are particularly enamoured with. Let's get that up. So Erasmus is the ability for students to come to the United Kingdom. This is from my friends at Facts4EU. Look at that, 99.6% of British students never bothered to use it. A tiny percentile did. Look at the second chart. It's going to pull up now from my friends at Facts4EU. Second chart shows the numbers going one way. Look at that. That's in 1 year. It's 27,000 EU coming in. This is prior to Brexit, and 9,000, not even a third going the other way. And Dennis, my point is simple. That came up when you add all of those numbers together. It totaled 143,000 European Union students in Britain, because of course they mount up each year in 2019, the final year of Brexit. And my point to you is very simple. They pay more for their university places. They price the Brits out of universities, and they particularly price the working class out, who are the least likely to go to university in Britain anyway. These Erasmus schemes are a trumped-up Ponzi scheme to prop up universities, keep jacking the fees up, and to keep the disillusioned and abandoned working classes out of university. It doesn't work for Britain, it works for the EU.
Sorry, actually, if that number of British went into Erasmus as a share of the total EU population compared to those who came here, we're actually sending a lot more pro rata than all of Europe. Leave that to one question. Now,
but they're the most advantaged students.
On universities, we have probably the second best university network compared to after the United States.
And that's why they all come here.
No, but that's a great thing. We haven't got much else.
It's great for the university.
It's not just that. It's also we have a lot of low-quality universities as well. We might have some very good ones, but I'd argue that you look at some of them at the lower end of the university league tables. We have a lot that are being propped up just because they are able to reach that level of international students that keep themselves propped up.
Our universities, are, I'm sorry to use the term, but professors hate it. They're a great industry. They're making a lot of money for Britain, and they're keeping Britain high on the map for intellectual and development and research output. You want to, rubbish and cut all of that. But Erasmus... Can we just agree on one thing? We did before we started the programme. Erasmus has got absolutely nothing to do with the European mobility scheme.
It might well be a tranche of it.
And in fact, no.
And Labour seem very, very enamoured with it. They talk about it all the time.
Well, I track Europe daily, as you know, Martin, because you very kindly have me on GB News. And I cannot think of a single minister or a top Labour or mini Labour MP who's mentioned Erasmus since the election. But leave that to one side. It is the Treasury that is anti-Erasmus, because you're quite right. It does mean that under Erasmus, we have to pay money for our students to go abroad, and we have to pay a bit more for the Europeans that come here. Now, a Labour minister, a Labour education secretary...
You've got 20 seconds, Dan, wrap it up.
Minister of Europe stopped all teaching of foreign languages up to the age of 16. If you think a monolingual country can prosper in a globalised economy...
We've got the lingua franca, haven't we? We've got the lingua franca.
There we go. No, that arrogance really is...
Well, it's a statement of fact.
Gentlemen, time please. Superb debate at the top of the five there. Dennis McShane, thank you very much, and Robert Bates, thank you. Now, still to come, we'll return to the breaking news that 33,000 migrants have crossed the Channel this year. The numbers are simply through the roof. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss My Big Opinion, Mark Meets, and My Take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
3 incredible young people from Essex are planning to become the youngest people ever to row, not sail, row, across the Atlantic Ocean.
It's about for 3,000 miles.
It is.
Give or take.
Almost exactly that, Sam.
The 3 flying fish, so-called, consists of Anna, Dunk, Harry, Alan and Rowan Daly, who are preparing to row that 3,000 miles across the Atlantic. It would be the second largest ocean in the world, and the trio are aiming to do that challenge in support of the Teenage Cancer Trust.
Well, I'm very pleased to say that Anna and Harry from the Flying Fish join us now. Very good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
I think the two of you are bonkers, but brilliant. Absolutely incredible what you're doing to raise money for Teenage Cancer Trust. Why did you want to do this?
So our third person, Rowan, his friend actually died. So when he was in secondary school, I believe, one of his peers passed away, and Teenage Cancer Trust supported them and their family a lot. So it was definitely the right charity. Yeah, it was.
Absolutely awful. So you wanted to do something to raise money for teenage cancer. Why rowing?
So my dad did it in 2021.
The trip, the Atlantic trip?
Yeah, he rowed it as a pair. Where we live in Essex, they actually build the boats there. So we used to cycle round there past the boatyard, and he got interested and actually did it. He was the first year after COVID. And one night, we all met in the Air Cadets, so one night after Air Cadets, Rowan actually dropped me off home and the boat was outside. We were obviously waiting to get it sold. And I think he was asking some questions, and we stood there at my porch and went, Rowan said, I reckon we could do that. And I was like, yeah, I reckon we could. And then we brought Harry on board, and that's kind of how it all came together.
If people are watching and they want to support you, do you have a
GoFundMe
page yet?
We've got social media platforms at The Free Flying Fish. That's Facebook, Instagram and TikTok, and our GoFundMe links in all of the bios on there.
Fantastic.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:26. I'm Martin Daubney here on GB News. Now let's return to the breaking news that GB News can now confirm that 33,000 migrants have crossed the Channel this year. It's a huge amount. And joining us now is our Home Security Editor, Mark White, for more on this breaking story. Mark, welcome back to the show. So yesterday was a brief day of good news. Sir Keir Starmer made that announcement, of course, that there had been the arrest of the Turkish Mr. Big. And today, Mark White, we're back to business as usual.
Yes, our account producer confirming to us that so far 122 migrants have crossed in 2 small boats. But as we speak, another migrant boat is out there. It's making slow but steady progress towards the halfway line for where it will cross into UK waters, and then, as is routine, it will be picked up by a Border Force vessel and those people on board taken to the Border Force Processing Centre at Dover. So likely to be about 180 or so by the end of the day, and that takes us, we're 33,000 now for the year so far, which is a good 3,500 more than the number who crossed in the whole of last year. And you're right to say, Martin, that this time yesterday we were reporting on that news conference hastily arranged by the Prime Minister to announce an arrest. It seemed a little odd at the time, and perhaps really talks to the sort of desperate need of this government to show that there is some kind of progress, activity that is taking place to smash the gangs, as the Prime Minister has branded it, to go after the criminal people smugglers. But the fact is, we have seen operations against the people smuggling gangs for years now under the previous Conservative government as well. There were regular arrests of those who were supplying boats and other equipment to the people smugglers. People described as senior figures in people smuggling operations. That did nothing to slow down number of people crossing the English Channel. And I don't think yesterday's arrest of someone will do all that much to slow it either. It might cause a temporary shortage in one particular area, but they'll quickly be able to fill that with other suppliers.
And Mark White, as you've been so eloquently saying for years, we can't stop the war on drugs. If you arrest a drug dealer, a new one pops up. It's likely to be the same with these human traffickers, right? Another one will probably be straight in this guy's shoes. Toot sweet. And another grim record, Mark White, we saw last night, on the same day as that good news, 98 people on board a single boat. And I believe, Mark White, that is also something of a new record.
Yes, indeed. In terms of a boat actually making it to UK waters, we regularly see boats leaving the coastline of France carrying 100 or more migrants on board. But they very quickly usually get into significant difficulties because they're so overloaded. They can't make any headway. The French naval vessels that escort these small boats across, controversially, to UK waters, intervene. They normally take a few dozen people off the boats, and then the remainder, about 50 odd or so, usually stay on board and then just make their way on a lighter boat across to UK waters. It happens day in, day out, and it hasn't slowed down. In fact, we are 3,500 ahead of where we were for the whole of last year. So that perhaps shouldn't surprise us then why the Prime Minister decided to hold this impromptu news conference yesterday, to show some kind of progress. But really, the efforts, the endeavours to try to dismantle the people smugglers will not just be measured in weeks or months, but years. And the longer it goes on, Martin, the more pressure, just like the previous government, the more pressure will really be felt by those in the current government about really needing to get a grip on this continuing crisis.
Thank you, Mark White. There, just a quick reminder for those tuning in, 33,000 arrivals this year. That's 3,500 more than all of last year. Still some time to go. And Mark White there with the very latest, possibly 180 today. 3 boats, 122 arrived earlier, 180 today. That's Mark White with the very latest. Excellent as ever, Mark White. Have a fantastic weekend, my friend. Thank you very, very much. There's lots more still to come between now and 6 o'clock, including a local pub changed its name as it was thought to be too offensive. It was called the Midget. The locals are campaigning to keep this fruity name, and that's next. But first is your headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. It's 5:31. These are your headlines from the GB newsroom. 4 teenagers and a 45-year-old man have been convicted of murdering 15-year-old Mason Rist and 16-year-old Max Dixon, who were attacked with machetes in a case of mistaken identity. 18-year-old Riley Tolliver, a 16-year-old boy, a 17-year-old boy and a getaway driver, 45-year-old Anthony Snook, were found guilty of the murders of Mason and Max by a jury of 9 men and 3 women at Bristol Crown Court after a 6-week trial. A 15-year-old boy was also found guilty of the murder of Max after previously pleading guilty to the murder of Mason. Now, a serving Metropolitan Police officer has been sacked after accessing confidential files about the case of Sarah Everard. PC Miles McHugh was among 3 officers who were found to have committed gross misconduct at a 3-week disciplinary tribunal in South East London. 33-year-old Miss Everard was kidnapped, raped and murdered by then-serving Met officer Wayne Cousins in March of 2021. GB News can now confirm that 33,000 small boat migrants have crossed the Channel this year. More than 100 others crossed in 2 small boats today, while another boat is making the crossing at this moment. It comes just a day after the Prime Minister announced the significant arrest of a suspected migrant boat supplier. The UK's economy barely grew between July and September, with uncertainty about the budget being blamed for the weak growth. It was expected to meet the same 0.2% growth figures reported in Germany and Japan, but instead the economy grew by 0.1%. The GDP figures have pushed the UK towards the bottom of the G7 growth table for the 3rd quarter of the year. Chancellor Rachel Reeves said she's not satisfied with the figures. And to the US, where Donald Trump has chosen Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as his new health secretary, a job that will make him take charge of areas such as drug, food and vaccine safety. This comes as Trump has also appointed Tulsi Gabbard as his US intelligence chief, sparking concerns that the intelligence community will become increasingly politicised. British defence figures have spoken out with their concerns by the president-elect's choice due to Gabbard's pro-Moscow narrative. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. A fine day for many of us out there. A lot of cloud in the sky, but some sunshine in the south as well as across parts of the northeast. But it's going to turn increasingly wet and windy in the far north and northwest for the rest of the day as a cold front sinks south. That's going to introduce a substantial change in the weather during the next few days across the whole of the UK. However, Friday ends with those clear spells in the south, good conditions for viewing the supermoon. And then, under those clear skies, temperatures fall away. A few pockets of frost and fog in the south by dawn. Meanwhile, the cold front sinks south to end up across northern England, where we've got the cloud staying at 7 to 11 Celsius. But a wet start to the day for parts of Cumbria into Yorkshire as that cold front sinks south. And for Northern Ireland and Scotland, behind that cold front, actually we've got a change in the weather on the way. Colder north to northwesterly winds, bringing frequent showers to northern and western Scotland. At lower levels, rain, hail, perhaps some sleet. Over the hills, those showers will be falling in snow above 200 or 300 metres. Further south, though, we're seeing that cloud and outbreaks of rain sink its way southwards, and as a result increasingly cloudy for much of England and Wales, with outbreaks of rain into North Wales, parts of the Midlands by the afternoon. Some spots of rain to the south of that as the cloud thickens, but nothing substantial. To the north, meanwhile, we've got that change that's already arrived. It's going to feel much colder in the wind, and it will be windy throughout Friday night. Gales for the far north of Scotland. That wind only slowly easing during Saturday. But it's also going to increasingly bring some wintry weather. Initially, snow building up over the tops of the mountains in Scotland, but by Sunday night, that snow will be settling to lower levels. And on Monday, outbreaks of rain for many parts of the country, but the risk of significant hill snow in the north.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Big problems in North Yorkshire continue for the A1M. The motorway is partly blocked northbound from junction 44 to 45 from the A64 York Lancaster exit up to Boston Spa at the scene of an accident. In Lancashire, west of Burnley, the A56 is closed southbound just south of the M65, where a van has caught fire and left a spillage of fuel all over the carriageway. And the A15 Lincoln Eastern bypass is closed following a two-vehicle collision off the Rugby roundabout. The M11 is blocked northbound in Essex, just after junction 5 at Loughton, heading away from London because of an obstruction. And in South London at Tooting, Mitcham Lane, the A216 closed following a building fire. 25 firefighters are at the scene near Southcroft Road. And in Somerset, the A361 closed at Frome following an accident. And that's the very latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Welcome back. It's 5:38. I'm Martin Daubney here on GB News. Now, moving on, what a story, because locals in Abingdon in Oxfordshire have signed a petition to keep the name of their local pub, and it's called The Midget. Now, this comes after a university lecturer led an 11-month campaign to change the name of the pub, and the owners, Green King, have caved in. But locals are fighting back, and GB News spoke to one resident, Leanne Thompson, for her thoughts earlier today.
I'm not feeling great about it, to be honest. You know, it's a pub that's been here for a very long time. It's called The Midget after a MG car, and they're changing it to the Roaring Raindrop, which a lot of people are not happy about. We know why they're changing it, but a lady apparently came in who was very upset at the offensive term for the name midget, but nobody here sees it as an offensive term. You don't see the midget and feel any kind of offence towards that. It's named after a car. If she was to actually come, she might actually know more about it, but apparently she's not even been into the pub. She's just heard about it and broadcasted on social media that she wanted the name changed because it's offensive, which as locals don't feel that way. It's the midget. It will always be the midget. And if you look, it's even still on Midget Close. So I don't know if they're going to change it to the Roaring Raindrop Close or anything yet, but we'll see.
Do you know, you should walk into the Midget now and go, do you serve shorts? And just keep going on the joke. It's named after a car, the MG Midget, that was manufactured in the town of Abingdon for a while. The car was released in 1961. The Boozer was built in 1974. It's proudly named after an amazing two-seater sports car that's still adored by thousands around the world, giving huge pride to the area. It wasn't named after midgets, you know, the Snow White and the 7 vertically challenged individuals variety. It's named after a car that was made in the town. And Green King, they caved in. They've caved in and changed the name. But look, in response, Green King did give us this statement on Midget Close there. They said, we thought long and hard about changing the pub's name, and we're also grateful to Dr. Erin Pritchard, who has engaged with us on the offence and hurt that the name Midget can cause. We hope that making the change in this way helps preserve our pub's historic links to Abingdon's past, while simultaneously ensuring our pub can be a place where everyone feels welcome, presumably even midgets. The cars, I mean. Now then, farmers up and down the country are gearing up to protest against the government's inheritance tax raid on the agricultural sector next week, and that's on Tuesday here in Westminster. But today, GB News reporter Jack Carson went to Lancashire for more Down on the Farm.
Well, we were here at 6 a.m. this morning as these cows all around us started to be fed. But the farmer, Craig, was up at 1 a.m. He won't go to bed until at least, or be finished on the farm until at least 7 or 8 p.m. That's a serious work time. But it's important when you are a cattle farmer, a mixed livestock farmer like Craig and Carl and the family farm here are, that you are about at all times, that you're looking after these cattle, because these cattle are Britain's food security. They've got a dairy business. They've also got, these cattle here which they can sell off and the cattle auction that we've been at today, because there's such a knock-on effect that this inheritance tax change could have. Very quickly, as you go down the line, you can see where cattle auctions can be impacted. We were at a machinery business, and already that machinery business saying to us today that there are concerns from farmers about whether they're actually having to pull back investment in machinery to save ahead of possible inheritance tax money that is going to be due to the government if their family farm was to have to be sold, and that inheritance tax had an impact on it. But we have been speaking to the farmers here. Craig Kempson is one of those farmers. He was here feeding the cows at 6 o'clock this morning. We spoke to him. Here's what he told us.
Massive impact. We'll have to sell up bits of land what we have, and then this farm's going to end up nothing, because you're going to be paying a lot of tax on your land, and then the inheritance tax. It's not going to happen. Our future will be gone. This morning I've been with a milk round, and I'm supplying families out the northwest with milk. So you get up, you have your breakfast, you put your milk on it. Easy for you. We've had an hard day already this morning, getting it out to you. If farming, if you don't have it, you've got no food. There's no future. I just don't understand where they're going with all this. Do you want to be importing food from everywhere else in the world when you can have it on your doorstep right here?
You can see there, just how emotional Craig gets. This is his livelihood all around us, but the government say they are committed to not changing the decisions that they've made. Yesterday, they reaffirmed that they believe only 500 farms will be affected. They say they're trying to do this in a fair and a balanced way, have a relief system which they say is fiscally responsible. Rachel Reeves saying today and telling GB News today that she believes farmers are getting a fair deal out of this because of the specifics to do with this inheritance tax rise. But you heard from Craig there, you heard about the people that we've been speaking to all day here on GB News. There are serious concerns here in Lancashire, there are serious concerns all across the country about the impact this is going to have, and that impact will be shown in the thousands of farmers and members of the public that are going to be heading down to London next week for those farmers' protests.
Farm in Lancashire, and as he said, on Tuesday next week, outside the studio on the streets of Westminster, thousands of farmers are expected to turn up, and we invited many of them into our studio as well to come in for a cup of tea to tell us why they were down there. Now, earlier on we put those concerns to the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, and here's what she told GB News.
If you're a couple who own a farm, including a home on the farm, you can pass on £3 million tax-free to the next generation. And beyond that £3 million, you are taxed at half of the rate that everybody else is taxed for inheritance tax, at 20% compared to 40%. And where there is an inheritance tax bill, you can pay that over 10 years interest-free in a way that no one else paying inheritance tax can. So I think this is a fair deal for farmers, whilst also ensuring that we bring in the money to get our public finances back on a firm footing.
It's Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, speaking to GB News earlier. Now then, is your dog racist? Well, you might think it's barking mad, but get this. Welsh Labour have been told to ban dogs from outdoor spaces to make them, of course, more inclusive. And I've got to be said, you've been sending me your dog pictures by their droves. Here's a quick one. This is Ellie's lovely dog. Very, very cute. Look at that, rolling over, just like the Welsh Labour Party did. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel. Stick around.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here
We do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
We're talking about Gareth Southgate and his proposed run. There's a lot of rumours going around saying he's going to get a knighthood. So people like Nana are saying to me, why?
Because he hasn't won anything, has he? Look, I'm not a big fan of football. I watch England and the big matches, but he hasn't won anything. I mean, like, he hasn't actually won anything. He'll be following in the footsteps of people like Sir Alf Ramsey, Sir Bobby Robson, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What has Gareth Southgate actually won?
Right, don't ask me. Let's ask our guests on this. So, has he truly earned the right to do this? Should all England managers, should you become an England manager and then get a knighthood as a result, or is that devaluing the honour? There you see on your screen to debate this, Harry Harris, top football writer, and royal commentator Angela Levin. She knows a thing or two about all of this. Angela, what do you think?
I think absolutely not. I mean, I know he's a good example to people, but he's a sort of almost. He's almost done this. He's almost won that. You can't have someone to have a knighthood if you're an almost. You can't. This is someone who does the most amazing things. This is a hero. This is a serviceman. It's not somebody who does really kindly and looks after his people, and it's just not fun. I think it just diminishes the whole thing of giving people such a high level of gratitude.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Your time is 5:48. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, was asked today if he would favour closer ties with the United States or the European Union. Now, here's what he had to say.
We need good relations both with the US and with the EU. I've been very clear that I don't think the deal that we've got with the EU is good enough, and that's why we are resetting that and looking for a better deal, whether that's on security and defence, hugely important, but also on trade. So I do think we can do better than what we've got, and that's why we've spent a lot of time and invested in resetting that relationship.
Now, it's worth pointing out that our friends from Facts for EU told us this week that 8 states in America, just 8 out of 50, their total economy is bigger than the entire European Union. But moving on, Labour-run Wales has been told to ban dogs from parts of the countryside to help make the outdoors anti-racist. Well, joining me now is the dog behaviour expert, Nancy Creedon. Nancy, welcome to the show. Absolute pleasure to have your company. Now, when I first saw this story today, I thought it was April Fool's Day. I had to pinch myself, but no, it's a true story. It's barking mad. The Welsh Labour Party reckon that dogs are scaring people off in the countryside, and so they're proposing to keep dogs from certain parts of the countryside in Wales. I've had thousands of comments on this and lots of pictures of people's dogs, and they all say one thing: of course, a dog cannot be racist. Nancy, what's your take?
No, a dog cannot be racist. Now, what we do need to remember is dogs will form associations. So if we make the mistake of not socialising our puppies properly, not introducing them to people with different skin colours, different ethnicities, then yes, we will have the fear of the unknown. And in some ways, sometimes with racism, isn't it the fear of the unknown? When you don't know something, you're afraid of it. And the same for our dogs. So they're like little children. They're like little 3-year-olds, where if they're not familiar with something, yes, it can be scary, but they're not discriminating. They don't have a vendetta and they don't conspire against people of different races. They're just little babies that don't know what's going on.
Nancy, that's exactly right. I've had messages from people today saying my dog used to bark at people who were wearing hats because they'd never seen somebody wearing a hat. But when they got used to people wearing hats, that soon went away. And then another GB News viewer, we've had so many pictures of dogs sent in, said that they initially barked at their postman, who's a Rasta. And now they love their postman, who's a Rasta. They just haven't seen the postman before. So this is simply a case of familiarity breeds the opposite of content with dogs. Familiarity breeds love.
And breeds friendliness, you know? And if we consider postmen as a race of their own, then maybe perhaps dogs do discriminate against postmen, but that's more of a behaviour thing now, down to anything to do with ethnicity or anything like that.
But Nancy, there's a piece in the Daily Mail today saying that dog owners are getting a bit anxious about this. The notion that if their dogs are barking at people of colour, then they're concerned that it could be seen as in some way discriminatory. Now, you understand that people want to do the right thing, but the world's gone mad, hasn't it, if we're considering dogs as racist?
Do you know what? The dog world has gone mad in itself, and the sense of entitlement that dogs should be expected to be allowed to go everywhere and should engage with everyone, or if they're barking at someone, well, that's fine, the dog's just upset. I think that we do need to remember that if your dog is barking aggressively at someone, there's issues there. You do need to address it. You do need to get your dog help, and it's not fair on the person who's being barked at. So even though we're talking about how ridiculous it is to ban dogs from certain areas and that dogs should be welcome or we're welcome, as a dog lover and as a dog behaviour expert, I'm actually on the side of people who are afraid of dogs. I think we need to be a lot more respectful to people who say, I want to go to the park too, but I don't want a dog running over eating my sandwiches. I don't want a dog peeing on my handbag. And I think sometimes dog owners can be so entitled that they can be quite obnoxious at times, and it's not fair. People are afraid of dogs, and often they're afraid of dogs because things have happened and because dog owners have allowed their dogs to do silly things too. So I'm a responsible dog owner. I will keep my dog on the leash.
Nancy, I'm going to have to interject here because I've got to squeeze in some pictures of people's dogs before we go. I've got so many. Nancy Creedon, thank you very, very much. Now, let's get those dogs on the screen. Loads of them have been coming in. Now, here's Tony with his pooch. Look at that, magnificent. And let's get to Reese's dogs. This is Poppy and Snoop with their pal Patrick, who they say apparently they adore Patrick. There's Pat. When he goes around to see the dogs, they go berserk. Poppy and Snoop, even if they haven't seen him for ages. And here's Ginny's dog. This is Treacle Pud, and apparently it said in the message, this is the look that my dog gives to the Welsh Labour Party. I also want to say thank you to Ellie, to Ginny, to Chrissy, to Reese, to Jeremy, to Titi, to Unju, to Tony, to Scott and Luna, the dog Peanut and Maureen. So many dogs, wonderful stuff. Thank you very, very much for your company today. Now, Jubes & Co is up next. I'll be back next, 3 p.m. on Monday. Have a great weekend. Here's your weather.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. A fine day for many of us out there. A lot of cloud in the sky, but some sunshine in the south as well as across parts of the northeast. But it's going to turn increasingly wet and windy in the far north and northwest for the rest of the day as a cold front sinks south. That's going to introduce a substantial change in the weather during the next few days across the whole of the UK. However, Friday ends with those clear spells in the south, good conditions for viewing the supermoon. And then, under those clear skies, temperatures fall away. A few pockets of frost and fog in the south by dawn. Meanwhile, the cold front sinks south to end up across northern England, where we've got the cloud staying at 7 to 11 Celsius. But a wet start to the day for parts of Cumbria, into Yorkshire as that cold front sinks south. And for Northern Ireland and Scotland, behind that cold front, actually we've got a change in the weather on the way. Colder north to northwesterly winds, bringing frequent showers to northern and western Scotland. At lower levels, rain, hail, perhaps some sleet. Over the hills, those showers will be falling in snow above 200 or 300 metres. Further south, though, we're seeing that cloud and outbreaks of rain sink its way southwards, and as a result, increasingly cloudy for much of England and Wales, with outbreaks of rain into North Wales, parts of the Midlands by the afternoon. Some spots of rain to the south of that as the cloud thickens, but nothing substantial. To the north, meanwhile, we've got that change that's already arrived. It's going to feel much colder in the wind, and it will be windy throughout Friday night. Gales for the far north of Scotland. That wind only slowly easing during Saturday. But it's also going to increasingly bring some wintry weather. Initially, snow building up over the tops of the mountains in Scotland, but by Sunday night, that snow will be settling to lower levels. And on Monday, outbreaks of rain for many parts of the country, but the risk of significant hill snow in the...
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Big problems just southeast of Glasgow on the M74. The southbound exit is partly blocked onto the A725. So this is at the Rafe interchange where a lorry is broken down. In North Yorkshire, the northbound carriageway of the A1M partly blocked from junction 44 to 45, just north of York at the scene of an accident. And the A60, the Loughborough Road, is closed between the A52 and Ruddington, just south of Nottingham City Centre for accident investigation work. The A15, Lincoln Eastern Bypass, closed off the Rugby roundabout off the A158 at the scene of a two-vehicle collision. And in Devon, the A30 has been closed just